Chapter 214. No one dared to investigate at night. There were also people like Ning Kei who knew what had happened and didn't want to investigate. The next morning, people in the camp found that the horse gang, which had been closely following not far from the north, had disappeared without a trace. However, before they could rejoice, they heard horse hooves and sharp whistles again. The horse gang came again in the morning, but they kept a distance vigilantly, not as arrogant as yesterday. Zhuo Zhihua summoned the Yan army general and severely reprimanded him. After all, these girls from the Great River Kingdom were cultivators of the Black Ink Garden, so they had a different identity. The Yan army general could only listen to the reprimand. Then he organized the team and left the camp. Ignoring the horse gang who were patrolling outside, they crossed a gentle slope to the south and continued to march towards the northeast palace. It was not until they left the camp that they saw a few charred horse corpses in the southwest direction. They thought it was probably the result of the chaos last night. The charred horse corpses had been eaten by the wild wolves in the wilderness. Their limbs were broken and looked terrible. There were white burn marks on the gravel, as if it had been burned for a whole night. Both the Yen cavalry and the ordinary coachmen were frightened and no one dared to speak. In the following days, the horse gang continued to follow the grain team, but they seemed to be more cautious. They harassed but did not attack, nor did they attack. For some reason, they were divided into several small teams. The horse gang closest to the grain team only had about 10 riders, but each of them had 2 horses. Obviously, they were greedy for speed. They had been in the wilderness for a long time and were not far from the Lieutenant Palace. If the elite cavalry ran at full speed, it would only take about 4 or 5 days to arrive. But now they were moving slowly with the grain wagons and people. Based on the current speed, it would take at least half a month to meet with the cavalry of the palace. And after Ning Kei's words, people felt that the origin of the horse gang was a little strange. They could not help but feel confused. They thought that even if they met with the cavalry of the palace, they might not be really safe. The number of horse gang wandering around was sometimes large and sometimes small. But there was always a certain number of them in sight to maintain the pressure on the grain team. Several days passed. Although the two sides did not really fight, the fear of being attacked at any time and the silent and oppressive atmosphere caused the morale of the grain team to gradually slacken, especially the pale-faced civilian workers. It seemed that if there was a thunder in the sky, they would probably be scared to death. Zhuo Zhihua came to the side of the carriage and looked anxiously at the figures of the horse gang in the distant sky. She said, "We must make these horse gang afraid. If we let them follow us like this, we may be defeated on our own before they attack us. Moreover, there are other benefits in staying further away." It was not convenient to explain the advantages of being further away. The disciples of Black Ink Garden around the horse carriage were well aware of it. If there was a danger of the camp collapsing, the horse gang would be further away. As for what would happen to the Yen army and civilians, no one could care too much about it in this dangerous wilderness. Ning Kei did not participate in the discussion. The Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom had been on good terms for generations. His relationship with these girls was also very good. But after all, he was taking advantage of the situation to enter the wilderness. At this dangerous moment, it was not convenient for him to express too many opinions. In addition, the more important reason was that his attention was always on the horse carriage. It fell on the girl in white with straight eyebrows, Mo Shanshan. After seeing the fire talisman that night, he vaguely guessed the identity of the girl in white in the horse carriage. Thinking of returning from the wilderness last spring with the disguised Tang princess, he could not help but feel a little emotional about the fate arranged by Haotian and his own luck. If he could be with such a person, no matter how dangerous it was, it would be a little less. There were more Yen cavalry escorting the grain team than the horse gang. Together with the girl disciples from Black Ink Garden, it was difficult to distinguish the strength of the two sides. Perhaps it was for this reason that the horse gang always followed the grain team closely and did not choose to attack. Since the tragedy of the wildfire that day, there was not even a night attack. The horse gang did not launch a night attack, but the grain team could not relax their patrols at night. They were even more nervous every night. Perhaps no one could see it, but every time Ning Ke woke up in the middle of the night, he would see Mo Shanshan in white appear outside the camp at night. He knew that she was setting up a talisman array. This went on for several days. No matter how strong the girl Mo Shanshan was, her psyche power was rapidly consumed, and she could not support it for a long time. Seeing the slightly round cheeks behind the curtain gradually thin and pale, Ning Ke finally decided to take action. He learned talisman Taoism from Master Yen Sei, and understood that before entering the knowing destiny divine talisman master state, the characteristics of talisman Taoism determined that a talisman master could only focus on defense and cooperation, and it was difficult to take the initiative to attack. Although Mo Shanshan's state was unfathomable, she obviously lacked a lot of experience in the application of talisman Taoism in the battle. It was late at night, and there was no half moon in the sky, only a few stars. The camp was brightly lit, but the surrounding wilderness was dark, and no one knew how many hidden dangers there were. The carriage slightly shook, and Mo Shanshan quietly got off. She was ready to go outside the camp to draw talisman arrays. Suddenly, her eyes slightly brightened, and she turned around and coldly looked at the inconspicuous small tent behind the carriage. Ning Ke opened the tent curtain and walked out. He looked at her and said, "If you are alone, the horse gang outside will not be able to stop you. But you are not alone. You have to take care of so many companions and grain wagons, and I don't know how many days you have to take care of them. You can't hold on like this." Mo Shanshan looked at him, as if she was looking at the dark night behind him. Her eyes were cold and indifferent. Then she slightly lowered her eyes, and her long and slightly sparse eyelashes gently blinked, but she did not say a word. Ning Ke looked at her expression and continued, "If you are a divine talisman master, you can burn all the horse gang with a talisman. The problem is that you are not a divine talisman master, so you have to change your method." Mo Shanshan raised her head, looked at him and indifferently asked, "What method?" Ning Ke said, "Whether the horse gang outside is real or fake, or whether they are raised by the left tent palace or the Yen people, we have to use the horse gang's method to deal with them." The extremely faint starlight fell on Mo Shanshan's beautiful but somewhat dull face, reflecting her black eyebrows more clearly. She looked at Ning Ke and asked after a moment of silence, "What method?" "There can only be one reason for the horse gang to take action, and that is profit. As long as they are sure that the price they pay will exceed the profit, they will naturally retreat." Ning Ke said, "Obviously, the horse gang's intelligence missed you. They don't know your existence, so they are forced to change their plan. Then we have already taken the lead." Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly, and suddenly asked, "Do you know who I am?" Ning Ke did not answer this question. Mo Shanshan repeated the previous question, "What method can we use to drive away the horse gang?" Ning Ke replied, "The so-called horse gang is a thief when mounted, and a citizen when dismounted. They don't believe in moral judgment, nor do they care about the general trend of the world. They only care about whose knife is sharper. If we want to frighten or scare them away, as I said, we have to use the horse gang's method." Mo Shanshan continued to repeat, "What method?" Ning Ke looked at the girl's beautiful but indifferent cheeks, and suddenly laughed, saying, "As I said, the horse gang's method." He was very persistent and bored, but Mo Shanshan was even more persistent and bored than him, and continued to repeat, "What method?" Ning Ke shook his head and replied with a smile, "We will become thieves on the horse and kill them." Mo Shanshan replied concisely, "I won't kill anyone." Ning Ke said concisely, "I can teach you." Mo Shanshan replied concisely, "Okay." After a moment, Ning Ke led the big black horse, and Mo Shanshan led a white horse. They slowly walked towards the dark wilderness outside the camp. The night wind blew the girl's fine hair on her temples, and she suddenly asked, "Where did these horse gang come from?" Ning Ke could not make an accurate judgment about the horse gang that surrounded them and seemed to be ready to attack at any time. He was familiar with the wilderness in the west and the horse gang in the wilderness. Even if he started from the cause of the incident, he still lacked enough information and the ability to analyze the political situation. The grain team, supervised by the girls of the Great River Kingdom, carried the goodwill of the countries in the Central Plains, and the intention of the Divine Hall to negotiate for peace. Now that the situation in the wilderness was tense, the authentic horse gang with a keen sense of smell had long disappeared. The horse gang that appeared now obviously wanted to kill and rob the grain. Their purpose had nothing to do with the grain, but to sabotage the peace talks. There were not many forces that had a reason to do so. The desolate man's tribe that moved south from the cold region of the far north should not be able to raise such a large group of horse gang in such a short period of time. The Ueluan Kingdom wanted to frame the people of the Great River Kingdom, but no one would be so bored and sinister just for a warm stream. The Yen Kingdom had been suffering from the Left Tent Palace for a long time, and they did not want to miss the opportunity to pacify the north. However, would the Emperor of Yen secretly take the risk of offending the Divine Hall? After thinking about it, Ning Ke could only think of the simplest possibilities. Once all of them were eliminated, he could not think of anyone else who had the ability to raise such a large group of horse gang on the grassland. However, it was not a big problem for him that he could not figure it out. Ning Ke's attitude towards the horse gang, who he had been dealing with for many years, had always been very clear. Only dead horse gangs were good horse gangs. Then, he would kill the dozen or so horse gang closest to him first. There were clouds floating above the night sky, covering the last few remaining stars. Far away from the lights of the camp, the surrounding wilderness was dark, and only the faint sound of horse hooves could be heard. Coming to the meadow about an arrow's length away from the dozen or so horse gang stalking them, Ning Ke gently lifted the reins. The big black horse shook its head impatiently, but it still stopped as instructed. The horse gang was naturally vigilant. Even the faintest sound of horse hooves would wake them up from their sleep. Ning Ke slightly exerted strength in his waist and abdomen, his feet stepped on the stirrups to stand up, and he took out the boxwood bow from behind. Mo Shanshan glanced at him and thought, what's the use of arrows at such a distance? The horse gang in the distance had already woken up and were ready to fight. In the dark night, Ning Ke could not see his 5 fingers holding the bow, so he quietly looked in that direction, and then slowly closed his eyes. He put an arrow on the bow, aimed at an unknown place, and then released the bowstring. The bowstring vibrated and hummed in the night sky. A horse gang in the distance was shot in the chest by an arrow. Blood spurted out, and he fell to the ground with a muffled groan. I had a bad cold for a whole day, and I almost fainted. Damn it, fortunately I wrote it out, damn it, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 2:15. Ning Ke is Mr. 13 of the second floor. The meaning is clear. He is an idiot. I'm also an idiot. That's why I decided to write 10,000 words 7 days a week starting from February 13th. I'll get it done. But the beginning will definitely be the hardest, so don't worry about me if your writing is rough. Next week, I'll start revising the second volume. Continue writing, see you later. No matter if it was a thief or a soldier, the person sitting on the saddle usually used a short bow or a machete because of the limited space. But Ning Ke was different. Since he started fighting in the city of Wei, the boxwood bow and padao he used were longer. So he was used to stepping on the saddle, straightening his body to draw the bow and shoot arrows or draw his machete to cut people. Although it was a little inconvenient to operate, in the eyes of the onlookers, this posture was actually quite magnificent. When he shot another arrow and killed the second horse gang in the distance in the darkness of the night, the girl Mo Shanshan, who had been following him expressionlessly, finally had some splendor in her eyes. The wilderness was full of winter clouds that covered the stars. In the dark night, even the hand holding the bow could not be seen clearly. But Ning Ke could accurately shoot the horse gang a stone's throw away. It was really incredible. It was as if the night could not cover his eyes at all, as if he could clearly see everything in the darkness. Although Ning Ke only had 10 of his acupoints opened and the chi of heaven and earth that he could control was too little, his meditation and mental training over the years had made his psyche power perception as sharp as a needle. Thus, he was extremely sensitive to the aura changes of things around him. When he climbed the mountain on the second floor of the academy, he relied on this to walk through the mountain path. At this time, in the dark night, he could easily see the horse gang and lock them in front of his arrow. It was also because of his extremely condensed and sensitive psyche power. The psyche power came out of the sense of perception and touched the chi between heaven and earth with the night wind. So to him, the wilderness was like daytime. This method should not have been used by cultivators in the past because it wasted precious psyche power. If there was enough psyche power, he could directly kill those ordinary horse gang. Why use psyche power as a means of detection? All in all, it could only be said that Ning Ke was different from ordinary cultivators. The amount of chi of heaven and earth he could control was so little that it made people sigh. His psyche power was so abundant and sensitive that it made people sigh. His willpower to combine cultivation and fighting was so great that it made people sigh. A few sigh had created such a scene. When Ning Ke shot the second arrow, Mo Shanshan quietly stared at him. As the most outstanding cultivator of the young generation in the world, she acutely noticed that there was a trace of condensed psyche power oscillating beside her at this moment. She could not help but frown slightly and thought to herself, is he really a cultivator? The horse gang in the distance had just woken up from their sleep when 2 of their companions were killed by the arrow. Although they were shocked at how the arrow could be so accurate in the dark night, they still reacted very quickly. They jumped on the back of the horse, fiercely squeezed the horse's abdomen and ran wildly toward the direction of the arrow. They wanted to shorten the distance between the 2 sides in the shortest time, so that the enemy could not display his terrifying archery. At the same time, they also wanted the darkness to no longer be a curtain in front of them so that they could fight back. The hooves sounded like rain. In the process of the horse gang rushing over, Ning Ke pulled the bowstring and an arrow shot into the head of a horse. The horse screamed and fell to the ground, throwing the horse gang on its back to the ground. Another arrow narrowly brushed past the cheek of a horse gang and flew away. The horse gang on the grassland were good at riding and shooting. While charging, they retracted their bodies into the horse's abdomen, so Ning Ke's arrows could not directly threaten them. In a flash, accompanied by the increasingly clear and dense hooves, the nearly 10 horse gang swept over like a gust of wind. One could even see the reflection of the sharp weapons. The big black horse had not experienced a real battle in the wild, but it was not afraid when it saw its own kind rushing closer and closer. Instead, its eyes revealed the light of excitement. It kept stamping its front hooves excitedly and wanted to rush forward without waiting for Ning Ke to pull the reins. Looking at the approaching horse gang and listening to their shrill and furious roars, Mo Shanshan did not know how Ning Ke was going to deal with them. Her fingers that were hidden in her white sleeves gently picked up something. The excitement of the big black horse did not comfort Ning Quebec. He angrily slapped its head heavily and signaled it to be quiet. Then he jumped off the horse's back. As soon as his feet landed on the ground, he did not hesitate and rushed towards the horse gang that was sweeping up the dust and gravel. The distance between the 2 sides was already very close. It was only a matter of a moment before they came into contact. No one had the time to pull the bow and shoot an arrow. The horse gang finally saw the appearance of the enemy clearly. The 2 horses on the left and right at the front lifted the reins and directly collided with Ning Quebec. The few horses following behind sat up straight with strange cries, pulled out the machetes from their waists and waved them continuously. There was a clang. Ning Ke pulled out the padao on his back and crossed his feet to avoid the 2 horses that came with a strong gust of wind. He turned his right hand and the blade drew out 2 snow-white rays of light. Then, blood suddenly appeared. The 2 horses cried out in pain and suddenly fell forward, landing heavily on the plains with 2 muffled sounds. Their front hooves, which had been chopped off by the padao, were still flying in the air due to inertia, drawing out 2 miserable streaks of blood. The blade attacked, following a curved and deadly cold path. If it was an ordinary person, perhaps he would not be able to avoid such a strange chopping. But Ning Ke was too familiar with the horse gang and the machetes that they used. He was so familiar that even if he closed his eyes, he could easily avoid being touched by them. At this time, the night was deep. There was not much difference between opening or closing one's eyes. Therefore, he easily lowered his head, turned and swept sideways, avoiding the several machetes from the horse gang. Then, he clenched his hands and the slender Biyao tore a few terrifying cracks in the night sky. It cut off several horse hooves, split open the chest and abdomen of the horse gang, and brought down a few strands of fine horse mane. Then, it was heavily inserted into the slightly hard mud of the field. In the blink of an eye, he had rushed to the front of the horse gang. Under his Biyao, 2 horse gang members died and 5 horses fell. But the machetes in the hands of the horse gang did not leave any mark on him. At this time, the winter clouds in the sky occasionally scattered, revealing some starlight. Although they still could not see his face clearly, they could clearly see his figure. The horse gang lifted the reins and turned back to look at Ning Ke, who was standing in the field with a knife. Their bodies were stiff and their hands holding the machetes kept trembling. But they still felt extremely cold. The horse gang used the fastest speed to rescue their companions who were still breathing on the ground. They rode together to the periphery for a distance and looked at Ning Ke nervously and vigilantly, but they did not have the courage to draw their bows and aim at him. Ning Ke walked over and listened to the miserable howls of the horses with broken hooves in the night. He held the Biyao in his hand and cut the throats of the horses slowly and steadily, letting them die at the fastest speed. Then, he looked at the horse gang not far away and stretched out his fingers to shake in the night wind. He did not know if the other party could see his movements clearly and if they could understand the meaning of his movements. "Why don't you kill all these horse gang?" Mo Shanshan looked at the horse gang who were fleeing in the night and asked in confusion. "The horse gang can't be killed." Ning Ke said, "At least I can't kill this group of horse gang who are following us alone." Mo Shanshan turned back to look at him. She looked very focused, but her eyes were still drifting, showing that she was not focused. Ning Ke looked at her beautiful round face and said after a moment of silence, "The reason why I killed people tonight is that I hope they can bring back an accurate message." "What message?" "I want to tell them that in addition to you, the talisman master, there is another person who is good at killing horse gang in the grain delivery team. If this group of horse gang wants to eat us, they have to pay a greater price. If the harvest is not proportional to the risk, maybe they will withdraw by themselves." Mo Shanshan said, "Although I have never met horse gang, I have heard many legends about grassland horse gang. They are known for being cold and bloodthirsty. How could they retreat because of some small setbacks? The colder and more murderous a person is, the more he is afraid of death. I may know more about horse gang than you do." He continued to say, "Tonight I came to kill horse gang not only to let them bring back a clear message, but also to teach you some things." Mo Shanshan's ink-like condensed but refreshing eyebrows frowned. "Teach me to kill people? Kill people, or how not to be killed?" Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, "You are the most powerful person in this team. When the horse gang attacks, I can save my life, but the lives of those ordinary soldiers and civilians still depend on you. But a few days ago, you wasted your psyche power to arrange talisman arrays outside the camp, which seems to me to be a waste." He said, "You are our big killer, so you should not be used for defense, but for attack." Mo Shanshan was silent for a long time after hearing these words, and then she said, "I have been cultivating talisman Taoism since childhood. In my understanding, only divine talisman masters can take the initiative to attack." Ning Ke remembered what Master Yen Sei taught him in Chang and City, and could not help laughing. He looked at her expressionless steamed bun face, which always had some natural joy, and said, "Who said that talisman masters can't attack before reaching knowing destiny state? As long as it is used properly, even if the steamed bun is frozen hard, it can still kill people." Although Ning Ke had a clear understanding of the grassland horse gang and had dealt with them for many years, the development of the situation was not completely as Ning Ke expected. On the second day, the horse gang stayed away from the grain delivery team, but they did not disperse. Instead, they formed a team again and followed them from a distance. Distance can make people feel beautiful and safe. Although the distance between the horse gang and the grain delivery team had no real meaning for safety, they could clearly feel that the mental pressure of the Yen soldiers and civilians in the team was much less. Even the girls from the Great River Kingdom could occasionally see smiles on their faces. A corner of the curtain of the carriage was lifted, and Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Kai on the big black horse beside the carriage. She looked at his cheeks that were mostly covered by the bamboo hat, and suddenly asked, "Are you familiar with the wilderness?" Ning Kai nodded. Mo Shanshan looked at the shadow cast by the bamboo hat on his face and said, "The wind in the wilderness is strong, and ordinary people should not wear bamboo hats." "But why do you and many horse gangs wear bamboo hats?" Ning Kai hooked the tie on his chin with his little finger and said, "With the tie, we are not afraid of being blown away by the wind. As for why we are used to wearing bamboo hats, the sun in the wilderness is too strong, so this thing can block the sun. The most important thing is that it can cover our faces." The purpose of covering their faces was not to be ashamed to see others, but to not let others see their faces. Whether it was the horse gang or him, they always protected their identities very thoroughly. Cat Girl looked at the group of horse gangs that were almost parallel to the grain delivery team in the northeast direction. She frowned and asked, "Senior brother, where do these horse gangs come from? This place should not be far from the palace. Does no one care about them? I seem to have answered this question a few days ago." Ning Kai pulled the bamboo hat lower and said, "Many of the most powerful horse gangs on the grassland have masters. Now the group of horse gangs following us obviously have masters." Cat Girl asked curiously, "How do you know?" Ning Kai looked at the group of horse gangs in the distance and said after a moment of silence, "Because these horse gangs are too disciplined." "Then who is their master?" "I don't know." Ning Kai shook his head and thought that there were not many forces on the grassland that could afford to support such a large group of horse gangs. However, as analyzed a few days ago, those forces had no reason to instigate the horse gangs to rob the grain delivery team. The grain delivery team represented the attitude of the countries of the Central Plains and the left King's Palace. The grain delivery team mainly carried a symbolic meaning, and the quantity was not too much. If the horse gangs came for the grain, they should immediately withdraw when they found that the grain delivery team was very difficult to deal with. Unless the horse gangs did not rob and kill the grain delivery team for the grain, but to break the agreement, or to target someone in the grain delivery team, then this matter would become very tricky. Thinking of this, he subconsciously glanced at the window beside him with the corner of his eyes. A winter wind blew and lifted a corner of the curtain, revealing Mo Shanshan's calm and indifferent face. In his view, the only person in the grain delivery team who was qualified to attract so many horse gangs was the girl in white in the carriage. Of course, when thinking about this problem, he excluded himself in advance, because he believed that no one knew that he was disguised as a male disciple of Black Ink Garden and mixed in the grain delivery team. The situation gradually deteriorated as Ning Kai thought. The atmosphere in the grain delivery team only relaxed for a day, but quickly became more tense and even panicked. Because in the next 2 or 3 days, the horse gangs that followed the grain delivery team not only did not leave, but also new small groups of horse gangs appeared continuously and merged with the horse gangs in the distance. This place was not too far from the palace. Even if the elite cavalry came to help, it would only take about 2.5 days to arrive. It was impossible for the grain delivery team to break out of the encirclement with light, so they could only hope for reinforcements. That night, 2 bunches of fireworks rose into the night sky from the camp, brightening up the deep night, and also illuminating the mountain-like horse gangs in the distance. Along the way, the fireworks bloomed, and the horse gangs converged. The number of horse gangs following the grain delivery team increased, and gradually became a black sea of people and horses. Even if the people in the grain delivery team looked at it, they would feel frightened. Ning Kai became more and more silent. He looked at the more than 600 horse gangs in the distance, and the doubts in his heart became more and more intense. What did these horse gangs want to do? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 2:16. A simple quantitative analysis could lead to a relatively accurate conclusion. For example, a middle-aged man who had 17 concubines must be rich. An official in Cheng, and who had more than 2 of Ning Kei's calligraphy in his study must not only be rich, but must also have a high status. Therefore, when the number of horse gangs silently following the grain team exceeded 600, the power behind the horse gang quickly surfaced. It was either the Yan Kingdom or the palace. Because in this wilderness, only the Yan Kingdom and the left king's palace could afford to support so many horse gang. However, Ning Kei still could not understand the purpose of this group of horse gang, because both the Yan Kingdom and the left king's palace should be very welcoming of the peace talks. Ning Kei became silent, which meant that he was also beginning to feel nervous. There were 200 Yan cavalrymen in the grain team, more than 100 commoners, and a dozen cultivating girls from the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom. In the beginning, the strength of the two sides was not that different on paper. He had thought that by frightening the other party, according to the horse gang's usual way of doing things, the other party might retreat. However, seeing that there were more and more horse gang gathered in the wilderness, he finally confirmed that the other party's purpose was not simple robbery, but something else. Now that there were more than 600 horse gang around the grain team, they had a complete advantage in terms of strength. Even if he brought Mo Shanshan with him and rushed over and killed more than a dozen of them, it would not affect the overall situation. No new horse gang joined the team, and the 600 horse gang followed the grain team slowly north in silence. For some unknown reason, the horse gang did not attack. They seemed to be hesitating, as if they were waiting for an order. However, regardless of whether they attacked or not, the horse gang was there, wandering in the surrounding wilderness, and the people in the grain team were under great psychological pressure. They felt that there was a dark cloud above their heads that could not be blown away by the wind, and instead, it was getting lower and lower. The atmosphere was depressing and even desperate. If they were not in the cold wilderness, perhaps the Pale Yen army would have already scattered. An invisible rope became tighter and tighter between the grain delivery team and the horse gang. Although they had not shown their ferocious faces, Ning Kei knew that as they got closer to the palace, the horse gang would lose all opportunities if they did not attack. Therefore, this rope would eventually break. The wilderness was not entirely made up of frost grass and black soil. There were also abandoned mud cities and undulating hills. Around a wilted poplar forest, the grain delivery team temporarily stopped to rest. The Yen general looked at the horse gang outside in fear, but he still sent out scouts. Although it was meaningless, it was at least reassuring. If there are no reinforcements, we won't be able to defend the food team. Now we are not far from the palace. Whether it is the elite cavalry of Chanyu or the cavalry of Divine Hall, they may encounter us. My problem is that even if they can't see the fireworks, you should have a way to inform them since you are such a powerful talisman master. Ning Kei looked away from the map and asked Mo Shanshan beside him. His tone was a little solemn. Mo Shanshan was as calm or indifferent as usual, as if she could not see the horse gang outside. After a period of silence, she looked at Ning Kei and blinked her sparse and long eyelashes. She said, "The Divine Hall is going to escort several important people to the palace. There should be a team of papal cavalrymen. According to their route, they should not be far from us. They should have seen the fireworks last night." Ning Kei stared at her dull and confused eyes and asked, "If they did not see the fireworks, would they know we are here?" Mo Shanshan nodded slightly, her straight black hair cascading down her shoulders like a waterfall. Ning Kei calmed down a little and took out a water bag to drink. After a moment of silence, he said, "If there are no reinforcements, I will retreat first when I can't hold on. Do you want to come with me?" The "you" in this sentence referred to the disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom, not the Yen cavalry and the people from the Yen Kingdom. Cat Girl came to deliver food and happened to hear Ning Kei's words. She blushed and said, "Senior brother. Senior brother. How can you do this?" Ning Ke did not explain anything and rubbed the little girl's head lovingly. He looked at Imo Shanshan, who had her head slightly lowered, and continued, "You should know that I am a very cold-blooded guy. The first thing I consider is my own survival. If there are no reinforcements and the horse gang attacks, the grain team will not be able to hold on at all. If you still want everyone to survive at that time, it is equivalent to sending your younger sisters and brothers into a desperate situation. So I hope you can be more resolute when the time comes." Because there were 600 horse gangs spying outside, the grain team was extra vigilant and careful every time they stopped to rest. In addition to sending out scouts, the grain carts would also be densely arranged in a circle to prevent the horse gang from breaking into the camp. Although this would bring a lot of trouble, compared to death, no one would think it was too troublesome. Suddenly, there was a noise under a dying poplar tree. Ning Ke stood up and looked in that direction. He shook his head, put on his mask and walked over. Cat Girl followed behind him curiously. The Yen general stared at Zhuo Zhihua in front of him with a gloomy face and said with hatred, "If it were not for you Southerners, how could I be assigned to such a deadly task? You still want me to hold on and wait for reinforcements in this situation? I only have 200 people and there are at least 700 to 800 horse gang. How can we hold on? How can we fight this battle? My attitude is very clear. I will take my people and break out of the encirclement immediately. As for the grain, it is not a big deal to leave it to the horse gang. As long as people are alive, it is more important than anything else. If you want to die with the grain, that is your own business." Zhuo Zhihua suppressed the anger in her heart and pointed to the frightened people around her. She said, "What about these people? They are the people of the Yen kingdom. As a general, can you not care about their life and death? Who will care about my life and death?" The Yen general waved his hand angrily and signaled his trusted aide to gather the cavalry. He was ready to break out of the encirclement while the horse gang was still far away. Around the winter poplar forest, some of the people of the Yen kingdom heard the conversation and knew that their general was going to abandon them. They immediately fell into a greater panic. There were discussions and cries everywhere. Some of the people even looked at the cavalry with hatred in their eyes. Zhuo Zhihua and two Great River Kingdom girls held the ebony hilts of their swords and stood in front of the Yen general. Zhuo Zhihua lowered her voice and tried to persuade him, but there was no response. The Yen general saw that the horse gang was getting restless and became even more anxious. He pulled out his saber and stared at the Great River Kingdom girls in front of him. He scolded coldly, "If you want to stop me, you will have to ask my saber first." Ning Ke stood behind Zhuo Zhihua and looked at this scene. He frowned. He still did not know the name of the Yen general, and he did not care about his name. He believed that if the general dared to attack, he would die instantly under Zhuo Zhihua's sword. However, the situation was tense at this time. If there was an internal dispute or even an internal fight, then the hundreds of people in the grain team would all die, even if the horse gang did not come to attack. How could he keep these 200 Yen cavalrymen here without causing any internal strife? Then he would end the internal conflict as soon as it started. The sparks would be extinguished and the chaos would not start a prairie fire. Ning Ke appeared from behind Zhuo Zhihua and stood in front of the Yen general. The Yen general looked at the young man wearing a bamboo hat and a black mask. He was slightly stunned. Along the way, he only thought that Ning Ke was an ordinary male disciple of the Black Ink Garden. He did not know why he stood out at this time. Ning Ke looked at the knife in the Yen general's hand. He did not ask if the knife agreed. He pulled out the padao from behind him and slashed at the cold winter wind. The knife rose and fell. The Yen general's head was separated from his body. He spat out blood and fell to the ground. Because it happened so suddenly and Ning Ke's knife was too fast and fierce, he did not even have the chance to raise his knife to block. There was an uproar. The eyes of the Yen general's trusted aides were red. They were about to pull out their knives to fight back, but Ning Ke stopped them one by one. Zhuozhihua, Cat Girl, and the other girls from the Great River Kingdom stared at the scene with their mouths agape. They looked at the corpses of the Yen army's generals that were still spurting blood on the ground and were speechless. They did not understand why Ning Ke would do this. Ning Ke gestured for them to use ropes to tie up the high-ranking officers of the Yen army. He stood in the middle of the crowd and looked at the frightened citizens. He looked at the Yen cavalrymen who had complicated expressions of anger and fear. After a moment of silence, he pointed at the horse gang in the wilderness and said, "The horse gang, those are the horse gang. You should know how cruel they are." He looked at the Yen general who was tied up not far from his feet. He then looked up at the crowd and said, "In this dangerous situation, those who want to abandon everyone, those who are afraid of death and want to live alone must die. Those who don't listen to orders will also die. Even if I don't kill you, the horse gang outside will not let you live. So I don't want to kill too many of you. You want to live? Then fight with your lives." It was dead silent in the winter poplar forest. Both the Yen cavalrymen and the people of the Yen kingdom looked at the ordinary-looking male disciple of the Black Ink Garden and his calm eyes outside the black mask. They all felt a deep chill quickly occupying their bodies. Because of the chill, they were calm. Because of the calmness, they understood that what he said was right. Cat Girl looked at Ning Ke's back as he walked towards the horse carriage in the forest. She opened her big and bright eyes in confusion and scratched her head. She realized that she could not understand this senior brother of the academy. He had just advised the Hill Master to retreat in advance. Why did he react so strongly when the Yen general was about to leave? The curtain of the carriage was lifted. Mo Shanshan looked at him and said, "Most of the fickle people I know are despicable. I am not a Yen. These Yen cavalry and civilians have nothing to do with me. Their lives have nothing to do with me. But as a Yen general, he has no right to abandon his people. The reason why I killed him has nothing to do with these reasons. It is purely because his death is more beneficial for the rest of us to live. As for being fickle..." Ning Ke began to check his bow and arrows. He lowered his head and said, "If we really can't hold on, I still suggest that you leave with me. So my attitude is not fickle. I am the same as that Yen general. We are both afraid of death. The only difference is that I have the ability to kill him, but he does not have the ability to kill me. 3,000 left. Keep fighting. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 217. The winter wind blew in the wilderness all the time. The wind might not be strong, but it was like a comb piercing deep into one's clothes, taking away the warmth of one's body. Mo Shanshan was still wearing that thin white dress. The dark blue belt around her waist was like a deep lake, forming a strong contrast with her flat and unfocused eyes. Her ink-like eyebrows slowly raised as she looked at Ning Ke and asked, "You killed their general. Aren't you worried that the Yen cavalry will hate you and not contribute in the battle, or even surrender to the horse gang? Cultivating trusted officers in the army would definitely harm the interests of the lower-ranked soldiers. So the dead general's relationship with the cavalry is not very good, especially since they are from the Yen kingdom. I am a Tang, I know this very well." Ning Ke used his fingers to carefully check if the straw ropes on the hilts of the 3 swords were strong. He lowered his head and replied, "When I killed the Yen general and subdued the officers, the 200 Yen cavalry were indeed angry, but not sad. That is to say, they are not sad. This anger is more from fear and uneasiness." Mo Shanshan looked at the bamboo hat that covered most of his face and said, "They are afraid of you. Fear makes people want to stay away. Perhaps it is because of this that they might surrender to the horse gang. As a soldier, even if you are a weak soldier from the Yen kingdom, surrendering to the horse gang is a very difficult decision. But such a decision requires thinking, and thinking requires a relaxed mental environment. Ning Ke raised his head and looked at the horse gang who were still patrolling in the wilderness but did not attack. He said, "The situation is too tense now. Arrows can fall on their heads at any time. The Yan Kingdom's cavalry have no time or environment to think. They are like a herd of wild horses that have lost their leader. As long as one horse rushes out, they will follow it blindly. What I want is for them to follow blindly." Mo Shanshan looked at his profile and asked, "You were in the army before?" Ning Ke nodded. Mo Shanshan gently stroked the hair on her cheek and said after a moment of silence, "Being with you, I can indeed learn a lot." Ning Ke looked at her and smiled. He said, "You are welcome. What you can learn from me is actually not good. If possible, I hope that I will never have the chance to learn these things in my life." After losing their high and mighty generals and officers who only knew how to suck up to them, the 200 Yen cavalrymen were not that sad. They were just a little angry. And it was precisely because they had lost their leaders that their anger quickly turned into helplessness. In the end, they just quietly obeyed. Any army that was good at fighting must have its own unique temperament. Unfortunately, the Yen army did not have such temperament. If it were any other Tang army, they would not have obediently obeyed the enemy's command after their general was killed. Ning Ke was very satisfied with the unique temperament of the Yen army. He did not appear in front of the curtain to personally command. Instead, he passed down the orders through Mo Shanshan's carriage. Zhuo Zhihua and the other 3 disciples of Black Ink Garden temporarily replaced the positions of the Yen military officers. They reorganized the camp, recalled the sentries, and strengthened the defense. All the orders were carried out as quickly as possible. No one, including the Yen cavalry, had any complaints. The order and atmosphere were even better than before. The grain team continued their journey north with over 600 horse gang following them. According to the orders from the carriage, the speed of the entire grain team was precisely controlled within a certain range. They were constantly changing their speed, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Although this was undoubtedly a torture for the Yen cavalry and the people driving the carriages, they still managed to persevere and caused some trouble for the horse gang. The most dangerous part of the twilight was spent in silence. The grain team dragged into a long line and wearily entered a low-lying area in the wilderness. The sky was already dark and the light was blurry. The so-called low-lying area was due to the rising meadows on both sides. In the dark, one could not see the end of it. It was like the mountain valleys in the south, just that the terrain was slightly gentler and not as steep. The dozens of Yen cavalrymen who were leading the way were surprised when they heard the whistle from behind. The whistle meant that the grain team had decided to set up camp here. Anyone with some military knowledge would not choose to set up camp in such a low-lying area. There were meadows on both sides of the low-lying area. If the hundreds of horse gang used the terrain to rush down, the grain team would be stretched into a long line. The fragile defense would be broken in a short time. It was extremely dangerous. Then, the latest orders came from the carriage. The grain team was to form a formation and break the carriage boards to act as a shield. However, they did not ask the people to dig pits or set up tripping ropes in the dark areas on both sides. It gave the impression that the people in the carriage had given up on defense and were waiting for the horse gang to attack. The last rays of twilight came from the sky, reflecting the blood of the dying struggle. The low-lying area where the grain team set up camp was already dark. One could vaguely see people hurriedly dismantling the carriage boards and smoke rising from the kitchen. Suddenly, the smoke that had just risen not too high suddenly stopped, as if it was frozen by the cold air. The busy people raised their heads to look at the meadow on their left. Their bodies suddenly stiffened and there was silence. Hundreds of horse gang appeared on the meadow a few hundred feet away. This was the closest the horse gang had been to the grain team in the past few days. The black mass of horse gang controlled the reins and stood indifferently above. Under the light of the setting sun, it looked like a dense forest that was burning fiercely, giving off an extremely strong sense of oppression. Ning Ke lifted his bamboo hat a little and looked at the horse gang in a strict formation on the meadow. He slowly frowned. He noticed that the horse gang today was more disciplined and more silent. None of the horse gang rode their horses to provoke them. He noticed that there were more than 10 riders at the front of the horse gang. The reason why he said there were more than 10 riders was because he was sure that these 10 or so horse bandits with their faces covered had never appeared in his line of sight in the past few days. This meant that these 10 or so horse bandits had just arrived today, and the alarming change in the ranks of the horse bandits was due to the arrival of these horse bandits. Even if they are not the representatives of the forces behind them, these 10 riders should be the ones in charge. Ning Ke looked at the horse gang who were pointing at the camp with their horsewhips. He looked at the cloth that covered their faces and said in a low voice, "If there is a chance, think of a way to kill these 10 riders. Maybe we can get out of this." Mo Shanshan stood beside his shoulder and looked indifferently in that direction. She said, "You once said that the horse gang's target is not the grain. Killing people to intimidate them will not work. The horse gang is the horse gang. The horse gang that is kept by others is still the horse gang. They are more afraid of death than anyone else. And I believe that whether it is the palace or the Prince of Yen, if they want to keep so many horse gang in the wilderness, they have to keep them separately." Ning Ke looked at her and said, "This means that these horse gang do not belong to each other. They only listen to the leader of the horse gang who just arrived today. Kill these people and the horse gang will definitely lose their fighting spirit." Then, he looked at her and added seriously, "Again, you are the strongest person in the whole team. So you must not fight until the last moment. Otherwise, it will be a waste." Mo Shanshan's eyelids drooped slightly. Her sparse long eyelashes rested on her fair skin, reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. She was very beautiful. Her slightly puffed cheeks were very cute, but her silence was unbearable. Ning Ke ignored her and took the heavy package off the back of the big black horse. He stuffed it into the horse carriage behind him and said seriously, "The things in the package are very important to me. Keep them safe for me." Mo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him. She said, "Your secret?" Ning Ke said, "That's right. You seem to have a lot of secrets." "You have many too," Ning Ke said. Mo Shanshan squinted her eyes and asked, "Why are you not worried about the horse gang's night attack along the way?" Ning Ke looked at her squinted eyes and the beautiful little wrinkles at the corner of her eyes. He could not help but think of the leaves of a certain plant, like a willow. The reason is very simple. It is because it is difficult to find the hidden property of the caravan at night. They wait until the day to search, but they are afraid that the border army will see the warning and come to search. Moreover, a night attack will reduce their riding and archery skills. Their most incisive methods will be reduced, and this is something that the horse gang cannot bear. It is rare for them to follow us for so many days." Mo Shanshan slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "Since it is rare, why can't they launch a night attack?" Ning Ke found that he could easily be defeated by this girl in white. After a moment of silence, he said, "These are the principles that the ancestors of the horse gang summed up with blood and death. They will not deviate from them. Or it can be said that they do not want to deviate from them, because it is already an instinct that is deeply rooted in their bones." Ning Ke looked at her and said, "Just like when you write a talisman, you do not need to think about how to write that talisman. The ink brush in your hand will make a choice in advance before your thinking and move on its own." Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly and asked, "You also know talisman?" Ning Ke smiled gently and answered, "A little." Perhaps it was because of the impending battle, or perhaps it was because the twilight was too beautiful and the night was too close, but in his eyes, Mo Shanshan had become much more pleasing to the eye. Although her gaze was still proud, cold and dull, he thought to himself that with her reputation and status in the world, it was only right. At the same time, Mo Shanshan also felt that this young Tang man had become more pleasing to the eye. That night, Ning Ke spent the night with the Yen cavalry at the back of the group. He ordered the Yen cavalry to sleep with his horse and was not allowed to take off their armor. He also put on a light armor of the Yen army. "Reinforcements are on the way. As long as we can last until noon, we will win. Beside the bonfire, he looked at the confused and even numb Yen cavalry and said seriously. There was finally a change in the Yen cavalry's expression. There was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. Ning Ke did not know if there would be reinforcements. He only knew that the horse gang would definitely attack the next morning. If the situation was not right, he would not hesitate to ride the big black horse and escape. But he could not forget to bring his bag. He should also bring Cat Girl and Zhuozhihua. Mo Shanshan should also. It seemed that there were too many things and people to bring. Completed on Monday, continue tomorrow. I seem to have promised too many days. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 218. At some point in the morning, the horse gang, who had been following the grain team for more than 10 days, finally launched their attack. The first sound to break the darkness was not the sound of a horn, but the shrill sound of arrows. Hundreds of arrows drew arcs in the air as they shot down from above the meadow. They tore through the cold air and the lingering sleepiness in the camp, whistling as they plunged down. Even though the grain team was mentally and physically prepared for the attack, they still fell into chaos. In the rain of arrows, they screamed in fear and hid in all directions, trying their best to crawl into the carriages around the caravan. The sharp and ice-cold arrowheads pierced through the sturdy carriage boards and were unable to penetrate any further. However, there were still some arrows that easily pierced through the torsos and limbs of the civilians and soldiers, causing blood to spurt out and causing miserable howls of pain. In the blink of an eye, they had caused great damage and death. The Yen cavalry at the southernmost part of the low-lying land was not in the camp. They were attacked by the arrows at almost the same time, but because of Ning Ke's reminder last night, they reacted faster. They all picked up simple shields in front of them or hid behind the rocks, watching the arrows fly over their heads nervously. The Yen horses neighed and galloped in the low-lying land. A few horses could not withstand the arrow wounds on their bodies and fell heavily to the ground. Ning Ke ordered the Yen cavalry to ignore the thinning arrow rain and gather their mounts as quickly as possible. Everyone, get on your horses and prepare to charge. Ning Ke jumped onto the big black horse and looked up at the edge of the rising meadow in the northeast. He was familiar with the horse gang's fighting style. These bandits did not have any supplies and did not have the habit of carrying a large number of arrows with them. Even though they had planned this attack for a long time, the horse gang still could not deal a fatal blow to the grain team by attacking from a distance. In the end, the horse gang still had to charge through the camp. It was as if a black forest had suddenly sprouted at the edge of the rising meadow in the northeast. Hundreds of mounted bandits dressed in leather armor and thick cloth appeared there silently. The scimitars in their hands seemed exceptionally cold under the first ray of sunlight. It was so cold that everyone in the low-lying area breathed heavily. On the slope of the meadow, a masked horse gang at the front slowly raised the machete in his hand and gave the order to attack. Ning Ke noticed that the horse gang leader was not holding a machete, but a straight one. Hundreds of mounted bandits dashed down the meadow in the direction of the straight blade. In the beginning, the clattering of hooves was a little messy and slow, but as the horses sped up, it became more and more concentrated and orderly. Over 1,000 strong hooves stomped heavily on the slightly hardened surface of the meadow, causing the entire ground to shake. In the early hours of the morning, the wilderness was like a boundless drum. The orderly sound of horse hooves was like a heavy hammer falling on the surface of the drum. Every time the drum fell, the earth would shake. The sound of the drum was like thunder, and the sound of horse hooves was like thunder. The camp, which had just been baptized by the rain of arrows, had just calmed down a little from the chaos. The soldiers and commoners, who were holding weapons and even wooden sticks, guarding behind the carts, could feel the ground tremble beneath their feet. They heard the deafening hoofbeats, and looked at the horse gang coming down like a black flood from above the meadow. They could not help but show a look of despair. At this moment, more than 10 disciples of Black Ink Garden from the Great River Kingdom tightly grasped the black wooden handles at their waists. They pulled out slender swords and stood up. They shouted at the soldiers and civilian workers beside them to raise the weapons in their hands and walked to the back of the carriage. These disciples of Black Ink Garden were only teenagers. This time, they had received an edict from the Divine Hall and came to the wilderness for training. Before this, they had never seen such a dangerous and bloody battlefield. However, the people of the Great River Kingdom, who were deeply influenced by the temperament of the Tang Empire, were also persevering and did not know what fear was. Looking at the approaching horse gang, the ferocious faces of the horse gang, the bright scimitars in the hands of the horse gang, and listening to the arrogant whistling of the horse gang, the young and childish faces of the Black Ink Garden disciples did not show a trace of nervousness or despair, because the calmness made them more determined and resolute. The calmness and determination of the Great River Kingdom girls influenced the Yen soldiers and civilian workers in the camp. They subconsciously raised the crude wooden spears in their hands. Although their hands holding the spears were still trembling uncontrollably, at least they finally had the courage to face the bleak situation and the ferocious enemies. The sound of horse hooves was getting louder and louder, and the horse gang was getting closer. The smoke and dust between the meadow slopes at dawn was getting thicker, the air was getting colder, and the atmosphere was getting more and more tense. Everyone in the camp had panic in their eyes, but they still had a glimmer of hope. They breathed faster and faster, waiting for the moment when the horse gang would rush to the front of the carriage. Ning Ke was also waiting, but the time he waited was shorter. He looked at the faintly discernible 100-horse gang on the meadow to the northwest. These horse gang had snuck in last night, and now they appeared on the meadow. However, they did not charge at the Yen cavalry. It was obvious that they wanted to suppress the Yen cavalry, so that the 500-horse gang could gather all their strength and charge at the camp successfully. Ning Ke would not fight with these 100-horse gang. He turned his head to look at the smoke and dust on the meadow slope to the north, and saw that the hundreds of horse gang were about to rush down the slope and into the low-lying area. He pulled down the bamboo hat on his head and pulled out the padao from his back, signaling the 200 Yen cavalry following him to get ready to charge. "Don't ask how to charge, just follow my horse." He looked at the nervous Yen cavalryman beside him and said this without any pre-battle encouragement. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he pointed his padao at the meadow on his right and kicked the horse's abdomen with both legs. The big black horse neighed twice, kicked its hooves, and galloped forward like an arrow. The 500 mounted bandits were like a black tide. They relied on the gentle slope of the meadow to increase their speed. In the span of a breath, they had already charged down the meadow and arrived at the low-lying area between two meadows. The low-lying area was covered with black soil and coarse gravel. It looked rather solid and was about 100 feet wide. The camp of the grain team was in the center of the area. With the speed of the horse gang, it would not take them too long to reach the camp from the low-lying area. What was more frightening was that if there were no traps or tripwires to slow down the horse gang, the hundreds of horse gang could easily crush the grain team camp with their speed. There were no tripping ropes or pits. There were no obstacles on the flat and solid low-lying ground. The soldiers and commoners at the back of the caravan looked at the clearly visible faces of the horse gang and felt a chill down their spines. Their hands, which were tightly holding onto their spears, trembled even more violently than before. If they did not know that they would die if they surrendered and fled, they would probably just need someone to shout and everyone would throw down their weapons and scatter in all directions. There was a great disparity in strength between them and the grain team. The grain team was located below the meadow, and they had lost the terrain. Without any preparation, how could they stop the ferocious horse gang? It seemed that there was no way to save the grain team. Although the 200 Yen cavalrymen from the south had already started galloping towards them, the horse gang had already charged into the camp and started a massacre by the time they arrived. Furthermore, the 200 Yen cavalrymen did not choose to come to their aid in a straight line. Instead, they strangely ran towards the meadow slope in the east. What were they trying to do? The cavalrymen slowed down when they ran up the slope, and it was extremely exhausting. Did they want to become the target of the horse gang's arrows, or were they trying to escape? Thinking of Ning Kei's insistence on not setting up any tripping ropes and traps last night, and seeing the 200 yen cavalrymen running towards the east, Zhuo Zhihua had a bad feeling. She did not want to admit that the senior brother from the academy was such a despicable person, but other than being afraid of death, what else could explain his actions? There was no time for Zhuo Zhihua and the girls from the Great River Kingdom to feel sad and indignant. They could only use the corner of their eyes to look at the Yen cavalrymen and the big black horse in front of them, which seemed to be getting further and further away. The horse gang surged towards them like a black cloud, their 1,000 hooves kicking up 1,000 black gravel and dust. There was a heavy thud. For some unknown reason, one of the mounted bandits at the very front fell heavily on the hard black gravel ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. The warhorse whined and could no longer stand up. Its front hooves seemed to have been broken. Following that, there was a series of heavy thuds. Dozens of cavalrymen at the front of the crazily charging horse gang fell miserably on the ground, just like the horse gang at the front. The valley was in a state of chaos. Zhuo Zhihua, who was gripping her sword tightly, did not know what had happened. Her eyes were filled with confusion. Then, the confusion in her eyes turned into ecstasy, as more and more horse gang fell on the seemingly hard black gravel ground. The horse gang charged down the gentle slope of the meadow. By the time they reached the low-lying land in the middle of the meadow, their speed had already been raised to the maximum. Under normal circumstances, this speed would undoubtedly be the most perfect. However, the problem was that this was not a normal charge, because this low-lying land was not normal ground. In the desolate and cold wilderness, it was rare to see a low-lying land between two long sloping meadows. This place was originally an ancient river, but it had dried up and disappeared thousands of years ago, leaving only the remains of the riverbed. As the sand and wind attacked and piled up, the appearance of the river could no longer be seen. The two sides of the river had turned into green meadows in spring and frosty white in winter, and the riverbed had also turned into seemingly solid black gravel. Even the horse gang, who ran amok in the wilderness, did not know that this low-lying land was an ancient river. Ning Kei did not know either. But last night, when he brought the grain team here and set up camp, he discovered the problem of this low-lying land. Under the thin layer of sand, all were round pebbles that were as smooth as before. The middle of the ancient river was deep, and the soil accumulated over thousands of years was the thickest. Coupled with the dead vegetation, there was not much problem for horses to travel. However, the edge of the ancient river bank, which was now the edge of the two meadows, was only covered with a very shallow layer of black gravel. If one exerted a little more force, or even if the wind was a little stronger, it was possible to touch or see the round pebbles below, as well as the irregular natural pits. This was not a trap. It was not a trap set by Haotian for the horse gang. If the speed was not too fast, even the heaviest Nanshan horse carrying two people would not be trapped in the accumulated gravel over the years. However, the horse gang rushed down the gentle slope of the meadow, and their speed was too fast. The impact force between the horse's hooves and the ground was too great. Therefore, the edge of the low-lying land under the gentle slope of the meadow became a trap set by Haotian for the horse gang. The horse's hooves moved so fast that they almost left afterimages. They stepped heavily on the low-lying land, and their strong hooves sank deeply into the gravel. They wanted to get up, but they slid away. Because they were moving too fast, the war horse could not maintain its balance, and fell heavily with the horse gang on it. A horse's hooves kicked away the black gravel, but it happened to be stuck between the round stones under the ground. At such a high speed, the warhorse could not stop its downward momentum, and its heavy body was pressed horizontally. With a crack, the horse's hooves were broken, revealing blood-colored muscles and white periosteum. It was a tragic sight to behold. The dozens of mounted bandits at the front had fallen, and the majority of the mounted bandits at the back had already noticed the problem. However, because of the damned reason, their speed was too fast, they were unable to pull the reins to stop their charge. One after another, the horses charged into the edge of the low-lying area, and then fell heavily onto the ground, letting out dull thuds from time to time. If the hundreds of horse gang that rushed down the gentle slope of the meadow were like a black tide, then the seemingly ordinary black gravel outside the camp of the grain team was like the famous breakwater on the coast of the Song Kingdom, a subsidiary of the West Hill Divine Kingdom. Countless invisible round stone pillars appeared, hard and mercilessly smashing the tide. The tide came in wave after wave, and broke into foam wave after wave. The waves in front fell first, and the waves behind followed. Each wave was higher than the last, and each wave pressed on the last, and each wave was more miserable than the one before. The scene in the slanting valley was extremely bloody and cruel. Countless horses fell to the ground, and countless horse gang fell to the ground, their legs broken by the heavy bodies of the horses. They frantically pushed the horses, but it was useless. The lucky horses and horse gang directly fainted or died, while the unlucky horses and horse gang were howling in pain, especially the horse gang at the back, who had charged at high speed but fell miserably. They were densely squeezed together, and blood oozed out like pulp, smearing on the ground under the morning light. The fighting power of the horse gang was much stronger than that of the grain team. Although there were at least 100 horse gang casualties in the previous charge, as long as they were given time to regroup, even if they abandoned their horses and charged on foot, they would still bring great pressure and danger to the camp. If the hundreds of people in the camp of the grain team were the elite soldiers of the Tang army who were good at fighting, or even if they were ordinary soldiers, they could rush out of the formation of wagons with weapons and kill a horse gang with a casual stab. Perhaps the first wave of the horse gang's charge would be repelled. Unfortunately, most of the people in the camp were farmers. Under the protection of the wooden shields, they might have the courage to defend with wooden sticks and spears, but they did not have the courage to charge out of the camp to kill the enemy. More importantly, the 300 horse gang at the back had narrowly avoided the natural traps in the low-lying land. At this moment, they were holding bows and arrows, vigilantly observing the movements in the camp. Therefore, whether or not they could defeat the first attack of the horse gang depended on the 200 yen cavalrymen in the south. At this moment, the people in the camp understood that the 200 yen cavalrymen abandoned the valley and chose to ascend the meadow not to escape, but to avoid the traps that Haotian had hidden in the ancient river. The 200 yen cavalrymen moved ahead of time. However, as they were charging in the opposite direction of the meadow, it was a huge drain on their horsepower. Therefore, they were not fast, especially when compared to the big black horse that looked like a bolt of black lightning. The moment the yen cavalrymen moved, the 100 horse gang who were monitoring and suppressing the yen cavalrymen on the meadow to their left immediately moved. These horse gang rushed down the meadow as fast as they could, wanting to make a detour and kill the yen cavalrymen from the side. However, they did not expect the yen cavalrymen to not follow the center of the slanting valley, but towards the meadow instead. The 100 horse gang saw that they could not catch up with the yen cavalrymen. They waved their whips and whistled as they increased their speed. The sound of hooves thundered down the meadow, and they suffered the same fate as their companions who were charging in the north. The cold winter wind of the wilderness hit Ning Kei's face, making his cheeks feel hot. Ning Kei heard the cries of pain coming from behind and knew that the horse gang would not be able to catch up with him. He calmed himself down and began to think of some strange questions. The cold wind could make my face hot. Was it because the wind was too strong and caused friction? But if that was the reason, how thick and hard must my skin be? Being able to remain calm in the face of a major event was a description of some outstanding human qualities. However, temperament was cultivated later on. Ning Kei was used to seeing life and death since he was young. He had been through many trials and tribulations. Whenever he encountered a major event that involved life and death, he would habitually think about trivial things and then return his emotions to extreme calmness. Just like how his hands, which were holding the boxwood bough, were so calm that even when the wind blew against them, they did not tremble at all. Step, step. Straighten. Draw the bow. Mispoint. Twist the rope. Release. When the arrow left the bowstring, it was like dew dripping from the surface of a leaf. It was slow and then slightly deformed. The center of the arrow bulged outwards. With the rotation, the bulge drew an arc in the air. The arrowhead was swaying, and the feather tail was swaying. It followed a complicated curve and finally became a straight line, tearing the air and flying into the distance. The arrowhead lightly touched the rough skin that had been tortured by the scorching sun and wild wind. It was like tearing the air, easily tearing the skin like paper and tearing the flesh like cotton, bringing out thick blood and broken bones. It did not stop swaying until it pierced deep into the throat. However, the feather tail was still swaying, but it became faster and made a buzzing sound when it trembled. 3 horse gang members were shot in their throats. Blood spurted out and they fell off their horses before they could even scream. Ning Kei's bamboo hat was tied tightly by the rope. No matter how strong the winter wind in the wilderness was, it could not be blown off. There was no emotion in Ning Kei's eyes that were exposed outside the mask. He only focused on the approaching horse gang. Nearly 200 horse gang members were trapped between the round rocks at the edge of the low-lying land. They were in a sorry state. 300 horse gang members were at the back, trying to forcefully rein in their territory. Their formation was extremely chaotic, especially the defense on the side. If there was a broadsword that forcefully slashed down from the side of the horse gang would definitely be defeated. He led 200 yen cavalrymen and charged diagonally from the meadow. He wanted to make such a broadsword. There are still 5,000 words left today, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 219. Both speed and slowness had their advantages and disadvantages. This was neither a dialectic nor a philosophical question, but a very simple truth. The horse gang charged down from the meadow, and because they were too fast, they fell into the rocks in a pathetic state. The big black horse, on the other hand, was too fast. Even with Ning Kei's archery skills, he could only shoot 3 arrows before he reached the edge of the horse gang. He carried the boxwood bough on his shoulder and stretched his hands forward to hold the padao on the saddle. He raised his arm and swung his elbow. The blade broke through the air and cut off half of a horse gang's shoulder. Then, he straightened his waist and straightened his arm. The sharp tip of the padao pierced through the eyeball of another horse gang before the machete could reach him. As the 3 horses crossed each other like lightning, the blood from the horse gang's broken shoulder and the fluid from the eyeball spurted out, spraying all over Ning Kei's face and body. The smell of blood mixed with other smells, and it was very strange. It was said that blood was hot, and the wind was cold. However, Ning Kei felt that the wind that blew on his face was hot, and the blood that splashed on his face was cold. Because he was very calm. Even now, he still clearly remembered the battle principle that he had followed for many years. Killing the horse gang was never as good as injuring them. If a horse gang died, then so be it. If he was seriously injured and could not die immediately, then he would be a burden to his fellow horse gang members. Although this kind of thinking was cruel, it was very useful. Looking at the dozens of horse gang charging towards him, Ning Kei took a deep breath and tightened his grip on the big black horse. He held his padao horizontally and turned into a blade as he charged forward. Behind him, the 200 yen cavalrymen finally caught up. They formed a line and attacked the side of the horse gang that was still in disarray. The winter wind in the wilderness blew again, but it could not blow the hair on Ning Kei's forehead. This was because his hair was already soaked in the horse gang's blood. At this moment it was sticky and tangled together, just like Ning Kei's conflicted feelings. The campsite was a mess, and there were already a few gaps in the formation of carriages. The horse gang temporarily retreated, but the wave of attack before they retreated still caused great damage to the camp. The camp was full of people and soldiers who were covered in blood and had numb eyes. If it weren't for the Great River Kingdom's girls, the camp would have been broken by the horse gang. The situation of the horse gang was not much better. At the edge of the low-lying land not far from the camp, many horses with broken hooves and serious injuries were lying on the cold ground, struggling for their lives. From time to time, they would shake their heavy heads. Under or beside the horses, there were many cold corpses of the horse gang. However, all the wounded members of the horse gang were brought back by their companions. From this, it could be seen that although the horse gang was severely injured, they did not collapse. They still had the ability and spirit to launch another attack. Ning Ke raised his arm to wipe away the trickle of blood between his eyebrows. He turned around to look at the northwest direction of the campsite. The Yen cavalry was fighting with a group of horse gangs as they gradually moved further away. He could not help but shake his head. In the eyes of the people of the Central Plains, the horse bandits of the grasslands were the most ferocious existence in the world. But he, who had dealt with the horse bandits for many years, thought that they were the most cowardly and useless existence in the world. Ferociousness was just a cover for the weakness in their hearts. At this moment, the 600 horse gangs around the meadow were ferocious and dared to directly slaughter the tribes of the palace. If they were timid, a group of Tang's soldiers would be able to chase after them. The key was strength. The horse gang was a realistic creature and was most sensitive to the difference in strength. Hence, they were the easiest to break up. Ning Ke thought that he was familiar with the nature of the horse gang. When he chose the campsite last night, he had hidden the geographical advantage and picked the right timing. He had thought that with 200 Yen cavalry charging at the side of the horse gang, he would be able to crush the 500 horse gang. However, he had forgotten that the ones charging at the horse gang with him were not his old buddies from the city of Wei, nor were they the Tang cavalry from the West Army of the Blue Water Battalion in the south. They were the Yen cavalry with extremely low combat power. The combat power of the Yen cavalry was even worse than Ning Ke's worst-case scenario. The 200 Yen cavalry had used the geographical advantage to charge at the horse gang. However, they did not manage to scatter the horse gang. They were not even able to penetrate the horse gang and were dragged into a battle with the horse gang. After a few rounds of attacks, dozens of Yen cavalry were killed by the horse gang. If not for the fact that the horse gang's formation was in a mess, this long-planned attack might have caused the Yen cavalry to be completely annihilated. The Yen cavalry and the horse gang fought for a while. Both sides could not take it anymore and temporarily separated. Ning Ke took this opportunity to ride the big black horse back to the campsite. On one hand, he did not have much hope for the remaining 100 Yen cavalry. On the other hand, he felt an inexplicable sense of wariness in his heart. A sharp whistle suddenly sounded in the cold air. Ning Ke reacted quickly and leaned to the side. An arrow flew past his clothes and hit a carriage wheel, the tail of the arrow shaking violently. He did not care that his black mask was stained with the horse gang's blood and smelled bad. He put the mask back on and took down the boxwood bow on his back. He pulled the string and shot a horse gang member who had rushed to the campsite. Then, he felt a slight soreness in his shoulder. He knew that he had pulled the bow too many times today. If he continued like this, his right arm might be crippled. The horse gang obviously did not want to give the people in the campsite too much time to rest. After a short rest, they attacked fiercely again. They did not care about their own injuries at all. This kind of reckless action that had nothing to do with benefits and risks had exceeded Ning Ke's understanding of the horse gang. The doubts in his heart grew stronger. More than 200 horse gang members rushed over from all directions. The civilians, who had already become numb to life and death, gathered unprecedented courage at the last moment of life and death. They carried their crude wooden spears and pierced through the gaps in the formation of the carriages. A wooden spear pierced through the chest of a horse gang member. Blood flowed freely. Then, 3 horse gang members crawled through the formation of carriages. They waved their machetes and hacked the civilians holding the wooden spears until they were covered in blood. A snow-white sword light flashed. The slender and elegant sword chopped at the 3 horse gang members with the sound of sword chi. 1 horse gang member was beheaded on the spot. The other 2 horse gang members had their legs and limbs broken. They retreated awkwardly. Covered in blood, the commoners surged forward like wild beasts, holding wooden sticks and stones that they had picked up from somewhere. They surrounded the two horse gang members and smashed them down. They numbly repeated their actions, not knowing how many times they had smashed them. Only when there was no longer any sound from inside did they stiffly stop. After Catgirl chopped against the wind, she habitually let out a cute shout. Then, she was shocked by the bloody scene in front of her. Her red face was covered with dust, but it could not hide the fear and panic in her clear eyes. After all, she was too young and had never seen such a scene. Ning Ke grabbed her by the back of her neck and threw her to the back like a cat. He dodged an arrow and held his knife with one hand to block it. Then, he took advantage of the momentum and cut off the right arm of a horse gang member who was sneaking up on him. The horse gang member covered his bleeding right shoulder and knelt on the ground in pain. Ning Ke did not even look at him. He held his padao and went to the next dangerous place. He knew that the horse gang member with a broken arm and no knife would be drowned by the civilians in the next moment. So, he did not want to waste any more energy. Once the formation of carriages was broken, everyone in the camp would die. Based on this simple understanding, both the civilians and the soldiers of the Yen Kingdom became extremely valiant at this moment. They took any weapons they could find and desperately attacked the horse gang that climbed over the carriages. But it was the Black Ink Garden disciples from the Great River Kingdom who made the camp hold on for such a long time. These young girls and boys did not have much battlefield experience. Relying on their pride, perseverance, and excellent swordsmanship given by their sex, they slashed out streaks of sword chi in the meadow of the wilderness and killed the troublesome horse gang members. However, there were too many horse gang members and too few Black Ink Garden disciples. Although the civilians and soldiers fought hard, they could not change the overall situation. The camp was surrounded by danger and could be broken through at any time. It seemed that they had reached a desperate situation. At this moment, a clear sound of flute came from the carriage in the center of the camp. Hearing the sound of flute, Zhuejihua, Catgirl and other Black Ink Garden disciples became spirited. They did not care about their psyche power and stacked their sword chi to force the horse gang members to retreat. Then, they walked to the grain bags. Hearing the sound of flute and observing these scenes, Ning Ke felt a little solemn. There was even a hint of anger in his eyes that were exposed outside the black mask. This was the team that transported the grain to the left tent palace. They were escorted by Yen cavalry and needed mules and horses to transport the grain. Therefore, in addition to many carriages of grain, they also brought a lot of hay for the mules and horses to eat. The unloading boards of the grain wagons formed a circular formation. The cloth bags filled with hay were all gathered under the boards. On the one hand, it was used to strengthen the fortification, and on the other hand, it could reduce the damage caused by arrows. Hearing the sound of flute, the Black Ink Garden disciples came to the front of these straw bags and used their swords to lift them into the air outside the formation. At this moment, the most concentrated wave of horse gang members attacked again. Not knowing whether it was because of the sword chi of the Black Ink Garden disciples or some other reason, more than 10 bags of hay flew into the air. Suddenly, the cloth bags burst open and fell apart with a hissing sound. The hay in the bags seemed to have been punched hard and scattered around at an extremely fast speed, like a grass rain. At the same time that the sacks of hay burst open and scattered in all directions, an extremely dry smell enveloped the entire camp. In between each sack of hay, a faint spark could be seen faintly shining, and then in an instant, the entire sky was set ablaze. The grass rain turned into a fire rain and fell from the sky. It covered the light of the eastern sun and turned the entire periphery of the camp into a sea of fire. The horse gang members who were dazed by this strange scene did not even have time to react before they were engulfed by the sea of fire. They became pitiful people who were about to drown or burn to death. The peasants and soldiers in the camp were also stunned by this scene. They held all kinds of weapons and looked at the sea of fire that was so close to them, but none of them flew into the formation of carriages. It was as if they had seen the miracle of Haotian. Only Ning Ke noticed the sudden change in the primordial chi between heaven and earth when the hay bags burst open and burned. He felt the faint talisman power in each bag of hay and even saw the subtle picture when the talisman paper was burning. The talisman fire was ignited by the hay and quickly burned and spread. It fell on the horse gang members and was extremely difficult to extinguish. The horse gang members who rushed to the front of the formation were on fire. They howled miserably and ran around. Some rolled on the ground, but they were still rolling in the fire. Some looked around for clean water, but it was not easy to find water in the winter wilderness. Several horse gang members who were on fire howled and rushed into the formation. They did not even have time to lift their machetes and fell to the ground in pain. The horse gang finally retreated again, leaving dozens of charred bodies outside the camp. Many of the bodies were hugging each other tightly. It was probably the panic before death that made the horse gang members unable to distinguish who was the enemy and who was the friend. A burning smell floated in the air. A cheer of victory echoed in the camp. Ning Ke stared at the girl in white in the horse carriage and said, "I have reminded you that you are the strongest among us and your psyche power is our most precious weapon. You should use it at the most appropriate time and not casually." Mo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him. It was unknown whether it was because she had seen too many bloody scenes or other reasons, but her face was very pale at this time, even whiter than the white dress she was wearing. "Many people have died. If I did not help, more people would have died just now." Ning Ke looked at her and said, "You are too soft-hearted." Mo Shanshan's eyelashes trembled slightly and she replied, "I am a woman." Ning Ke suppressed his anger and mocked, "You are not married yet." Mo Shanshan calmly replied, "Even if I am married, I will not marry you." Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "If you still have psyche power, you must leave the last bit to me." He was a talisman cultivator and was very clear about the consumption of psyche power by talisman Taoism. The girl's pale and haggard cheeks showed that she had consumed too much psyche power these days. He had to admit that in the whole team, the girl in white was the strongest. Therefore, he could not help but feel angry in the face of such a situation. The horse gang suffered heavy casualties under the fire talisman, but there were at least 200 horse gang members above the meadow who still had the strength to fight. Mo Shanshan's psyche power was exhausted, and his real state was only no doubt state, so he could not resist at all. Of course, Ning Ke still had some trump cards to save his life. But things like the primordial 13 arrows and the brocade pouch given to him by his master would be a great waste if they were used on these horse gang members. Before his life was really in danger, he would never use them, even though he was just a little less stingy than Sang Sang. The key was the reinforcements. The grain team camp had lasted for such a long time, but the reinforcements he had imagined never appeared. If he had been sure that there would not be any reinforcements from the beginning, he would have already escaped on the big black horse. "Are there any reinforcements?" He stared into Mo Shanshan's eyes and asked. Mo Shanshan looked back at him coldly and said, "Only the reinforcements know." Ning Ke did not try to communicate with her anymore and said directly, "Get ready to break through. My horse can only take one person. I will take Cat Girl, and you will be responsible for your people." Mo Shanshan asked, "Then what about the Yen soldiers and civilians who have been fighting with you for such a long time?" Ning Ke answered, "I just met them by chance, and we are not comrades." Mo Shanshan shook her head gently and said, "I will not leave." Ning Ke looked at her and suddenly said, "Haven't you noticed that the horse gang's target on the meadow is to kill you? Apart from you, who else in the grain team is worth paying such a big price for?" Mo Shanshan looked at him and said calmly, "If the horse gang's target is me, then these people will die because of me. All the more reason for me not to leave them." Ning Ke raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "Idiot, if you leave, you can attract the horse gang's attention. Then why would the horse gang attack the Yen soldiers and civilians who are not a threat?" Mo Shanshan smiled slightly and said, "You don't have to lie to me. I now understand how cruel the horse gang is." Ning Ke suddenly realized that her usually listless eyes had become exceptionally clear and certain, as if she could easily see through his thoughts. He looked at her for a long time, then turned around and left. The horse gang on the meadow was gathering, and there might be another attack in the next moment. He used his palm to wipe away the coagulated blood on his face and changed into a new mask. As he walked through the camp full of corpses and broken soldiers, both the Yan's soldiers and civilians would automatically avoid him when they saw him covered in blood. Even Zhuo Zhihua and the other girls from the Great River Kingdom looked at him with admiration and fear. Since the battle with the horse gang so far, apart from the fire talisman that burned the sky, the main reason why the grain team could still survive was because of Ning Quebec. He had killed many horse gang members with his padao. Many people saw how he killed the horse gang. He killed people like grass without a sound. What made people feel the most cold and awe-inspiring was the calmness with which he killed the horse gang. This calmness seemed to contain some kind of indifference towards life. Feeling the strange eyes from all around, especially the timid look of Cat Girl, Ning Ke did not explain anything. He quietly ordered people to repair the cart array, and at the same time, he used his peripheral vision to observe the surrounding meadow and valley, thinking about the escape route. The horse gang was afraid of death, and so was he. However, he knew a fact better than most horse gang members: the braver you were in the face of death, the more difficult it was for you to die. This was the precious experience gained from countless years of life and death experiences since childhood. As for indifference to life, he had always been indifferent to the lives of the horse gang. The reason why the horse gang by the Shubi Lake was so frightened by him was that he was just an ordinary soldier in the city of Wei. Once he left the city of Wei and entered the wilderness, he was a thief on horseback. Ning Ke and his comrades in the city of Wei were horse gang members, the most ferocious kind of horse gang. In those years, he had killed countless horse gang members. If it was at that time, with a world-famous female talisman master behind him, he might have stayed to deal with the horse gang for a while. But not today. Because he was a little uneasy. It was not because there were too many horse gang members, nor was it because of the cruel and passive situation. It was because he always felt that someone was watching him, and that person had been watching him for a long time. Not one day, not 2 days, but many days. At the highest point of the meadow in the east, a dozen horse gang members stood quietly, looking down at the chaotic battlefield. Most of the dozen horse gang members arrived last night, and they were the ones who attracted Ning Ke's attention. Different from the ordinary horse gang members, they all covered their faces with cloth, as if they did not want others to see their faces. It was obvious that these dozen horse gang members were the leaders of the 600 horse gang members. However, for some unknown reason, the horse gang members kept dying in the valley. Whether they were killed by the Yan cavalry or crushed to death by falling horses, they remained calm. When the burning fire talisman in the camp of the grain team was ignited, most of the dozen horse gang members finally showed shock in their eyes. However, the leader of the horse gang at the front remained absolutely calm. This horse gang leader's eyes were full of vicissitudes, and he was obviously middle-aged. There is indeed a very powerful talisman master in the grain team. Maybe it really is that young talisman master. The disciples of Black Ink Garden are indeed the disciples of the master of calligrapher. Their sword aura is really powerful. The horse gang leader said coldly, but after so many days, even the legendary calligraphy addict's psyche power must be drained. Let the people below prepare to continue the attack. The continuous attack for several days and nights was to drain the psyche power of the young talisman master hidden in the grain team. This leader's plan seemed to be very patient, and now he did not hesitate to let his subordinates use their lives to drain the last of the psyche power of the young talisman master, showing his cold-blooded ruthlessness. Feeling the hesitation of his subordinates, the leader frowned slightly and said coldly, "The Central Plains Coalition Army and the palace are negotiating for peace. Other than the desolate man, the most unlucky ones are your horse gang members. Kill the people we should kill to stop this negotiation. For this goal, it is worth it no matter how many people die." A subordinate said in confusion, "The Palace Chanyu and the Divine Hall will not be fooled by such an obvious trick." The leader said coldly, "What we want is the truth. The truth is more powerful than any other words. As long as we kill these people below, there is no way for this negotiation to continue. The riders on the meadow thought of the bigwig and immediately understood the meaning of the leader's words. The leader looked at a place in the camp and said, "Continue the attack. If the person on the black horse tries to escape from the camp, it is time for us to do it ourselves. Remember, we must ensure that that person is killed in this operation." The riders only knew that the person the leader was talking about was a male disciple of the Black Ink Garden who had previously shown extremely powerful strength. But they did not know the person's real identity, so they were very confused and thought that if they wanted to cause enough shock in the wilderness, the first goal should be to kill the young talisman master in the horse carriage. A horse gang member behind the leader hesitated for a moment, and then he plucked up his courage and said, "Your Excellency, the casualties of our subordinates are too heavy. We really can't fight anymore. If we continue to force them, I am afraid that these guys will collapse." This title was very strange. It did not seem like a title among horse gangs, but more like an official title. The horse gang leader glanced at him lightly and said, "If you can't command these horse gangs after leading them in the wilderness for nearly 10 years, then what is the use of you living?" The horse gang member felt a chill all over under his gaze and did not dare to say another word. The horse gang leader looked at the camp below and said emotionlessly, "These horse gangs don't know their identity and always think that they are real horse gangs. But you can't forget your identity. Thieves on the horse, soldiers off the horse. And you are the soldiers of the general." Hearing these words, the meadow fell silent. After a long time, someone finally asked, "Your Excellency, how to deal with the young talisman master in the carriage? No matter how strong the calligraphy addict is, she has not entered the knowing destiny state. Once her psyche power is exhausted, how is she different from an ordinary person? And even if she still has the strength to fight, can she stop us from killing that young man?" Since the beginning of the battle, more than 10 cavalrymen who had been quietly standing on the top of the meadow dispersed and gathered their subordinates. They began to prepare for the last and most powerful attack, leaving only the horse gang leader there. The horse gang leader raised his right hand and pressed his bamboo hat lower. He quietly looked at the young man in the Black Ink Garden uniform in the camp below, who was covered in blood with knives and arrows on his back. After a long time of silence, he smiled with mixed feelings. From last year in Cheng and to this moment, he had been secretly watching this man called Ning Ke for a long time. Although he had never found any evidence to prove that Ning Ke was related to the death of the censor Zhang Yuqi, nor did he find that this man was hostile to the general, he did not know why he always felt that this man would be trouble. Because Ning Ke was a suspect, and because Ning Ke had now entered the second floor of the academy, became the only successor of the divine talisman master Yen Sei, and was also favored by his majesty. Therefore, even if there was only one suspicion, they still needed to be very vigilant. Especially when Ning Ke came to the frontier fortress of the north of Yan Kingdom, no one knew whether he had secretly received the imperial order or not, and no one knew the deep meaning of the academy's action. Therefore, trouble became pressure, and it was meaningless to be suspicious. There was no need to investigate whether this man was involved in the death of the censor, and there was no need to investigate whether this man was secretly against the general. They could only and must do one thing, and that was to eliminate the possible threat for the general. Thinking of this, the horse gang leader's complicated smile gradually disappeared. If it were any other time and place, no one would dare to murder a disciple of the second floor of the academy in broad daylight. But now they were in the wilderness, and no one knew the relationship between these horse gang and the general. The imperial court had already suspected the general, and this group of horse gang had to be cleaned up sooner or later. Today, killing Ning Ke, destroying the peace talks, and wiping out this group of horse gang was a wonderful thing. Therefore, when the news of Ning Ke leaving the Blue Water Battalion in disguise and escorting the grain team into the wilderness with the disciples of Black Ink Garden reached the general's mansion, he spared no effort and did not sleep for several days and nights to rush here from Tiang City to personally take charge of this matter. This was a good opportunity given by Haotian. If he missed it, he would be punished by heaven. However, just when the horse gang was about to launch another attack, Ning Ke was ready to ride away, and the horse gang leader was ready to take advantage of the situation to kill him. There was a burst of dense hoofbeats in the distance of the wilderness meadow. The disciples of Black Ink Garden and the Yen Kingdom's soldiers who were vigilantly preparing for battle in the camp under the meadow, and the horse gang who were ready to charge between the meadow and the gentle slope of the meadow, all stopped their respective movements and looked towards the source of the hoofbeats. A group of cavalry came from the meadow in the west. There were not many people in this group of cavalry, about 100. However, both the cavalrymen and the horses under them were wearing gorgeous black armors with golden edges. They looked solemn and imposing, as if there were tens of thousands of cavalry coming together. It was the papal cavalry troop of Divine Hall, known as the strongest cavalry in the world. There was a burst of enthusiastic cheers under the meadow. The horse gang quickly retreated and lined up, ready to retreat. However, what happened next was out of everyone's expectation. An old hand stretched out from a carriage in the middle of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. The 100 cavalrymen of Divine Hall slowly stopped and looked at this side indifferently from thousands of feet away. They did not immediately attack the horse gang. People in the camp of the grain team looked at that side in astonishment. The cheers gradually subsided and became dead silent. Some people guessed the intention of this group of cavalrymen of Divine Hall, and their faces showed a look of disbelief and indignation. I didn't stop writing. I wrote 12,000 words today. The task on Tuesday is finished. Oh, I only need to write 8,000 words tomorrow. How happy I am. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 220. At this time, the morning sun had already climbed up to the sky, bringing a rare trace of warmth to the wilderness. On the meadow, hundreds of cavalrymen of Divine Hall stood silently and solemnly. Their black armor was painted with complex golden patterns, which were difficult to understand, shining with holy light under the sun. The flags in front of the formation were fluttering in the wind, looking extremely solemn and holy. This group of cavalrymen was the world-famous cavalrymen of West Hill Divine Hall, also known as the Apologetic Divine Army. They left West Hill a few months ago and arrived at the frontier fortress of the wilderness via capital Cheng of Yen Kingdom. This time, they were ordered by the Divine Hall to escort some distinguished bigwigs to the palace to participate in the negotiation. It was also the team that Mo Shanshan had mentioned to Ning Quebec. The night before, they had already seen the warning fireworks shot from the camp of the grain team and received the Fu text message asking for help through other means. However, perhaps because the wilderness was remote and dangerous, this team of cavalrymen of Divine Hall did not immediately rush to help. Instead, they followed the original route steadily until they met in the meadow valley that had evolved from the ancient river. Among the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, there were more than 10 monks of Yueluan Kingdom and students of Revelation Institute, as well as a horse carriage. The door of the carriage opened, and a small foot wearing cyan cloth shoes stepped on the carriage board. It was an old woman with a wrinkled face, wearing a very strange robe that seemed to be made of countless different kinds of cloth. It looked extremely thin, and no one knew how it could withstand the cold wind in the wilderness. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall escorted the students of the Revelation Institute and the disciples of the White Tower Temple of Yueluan Kingdom to the palace. It was also a kind of trial. And this woman was the leader of this team because she was the highly respected aunt of Yueluan Kingdom, Cuny Maddie. Due to historical reasons, the relationship between Yueluan Kingdom and Great River Kingdom had always been very bad. A few days ago, in the frontier fortress of Northern Yen Kingdom in the south, there was some friction because of the warm stream. Aunt Cuny Maddie, who was said to be extremely vengeful and narrow-minded, directly ordered the girls of Black Ink Garden of Great River Kingdom to undertake such a dangerous mission through the Divine Hall. At this time, looking at the besieged disciples of Black Ink Garden below the valley, she naturally had no impulse to rescue them. But after all, she was a senior Vedanta in the cultivation world and had to maintain the dignity and glory of Divine Hall. Naturally, she would not directly express her intention in front of everyone. Cuny Maddie looked at the messy camp below the valley not far away. There was no emotion on her face. Every wrinkle on her face was filled with coldness and strangeness. Her voice was hoarse and sharp, which sounded very uncomfortable. Fu text message. I don't know who the Fu text message is, the talisman master in the grain team of the camp. Of talisman text message. I don't know who the Fu text message in the camp is. Of Talisoff the grain team camp. We not. Not of the defense. Of it. And of. Not far below the meadow, the camp of the grain team was covered with corpses and blood. The formation of carriages was about to collapse, and the horse gang on the gentle slope in the northeast had already assembled and were ready to launch another attack. Everyone knew that the people in the camp were about to collapse, but Cuny Maddie made such a statement, which was equivalent to lying through her teeth. However, neither the monks of the White Tower Temple nor the students of the Revelation Institute seemed to hear what she said. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly nodded to show that he understood. His indifferent face did not show any strange emotion. Haotian Taoism and Buddhism sect had always been on good terms. Especially in recent years, because of the priest of the judicial department, Prince Long Qing, the relationship between West Hill and Yueluan Kingdom became closer. As the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, he was personally led by the priest. Therefore, he had always respected Aunt Cuny Maddie's opinion. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall did not want to lead his subordinates to rescue those people below the meadow. He had to protect the Revelation Institute students and the White Tower Temple monks in the formation, especially the noble girl in the carriage. If he rashly attacked and scared her, how could he explain to the priest? Although he was a master in the see-through realm and his 100 divine cavalrymen were the most powerful elite divine cavalrymen in the world, there were at least 200 or 300 horse gangs on the meadow. If he wanted to kill all the horse gangs, he would be injured. The life of every cavalryman of Divine Hall was extremely precious. They could only bleed for the dignity and glory of the Divine Hall. How could they risk their lives for those lowly people below the meadow? Moreover, the Great River Kingdom was close to the Tang Empire. The West Hill Divine Palace had been dissatisfied with them for many years. At this time, it was reasonable to let them suffer. As for the people and cavalrymen of Yan Kingdom, they were the direct descendants of Crown Prince Yan Chongming and had nothing to do with the priest. It did not matter even if many of them died. As for the face and morality of the Divine Hall, the commander thought indifferently. Seeing that the apologetic Divine Army was here, the horse gangs would be sensible and would not go too far. Moreover, whatever the Divine Hall thought was right, it was right and could not be questioned. The commander slowly raised his right hand and gently waved it forward, indicating that the cavalrymen were divided into 3 teams, the front, the middle and the back. They slowly dispersed along the edge of the meadow and made a downward movement, but obviously they were not ready to fight. In the camp below the meadow, there were faint cries and curses of despair. Listening to those dirty words, Cuny Maddie's face became more and more gloomy. Her wrinkles gradually overflowed with anger. She said in a cold voice, "A group of lowly people who don't know their manners. I'd like to see how capable the disciples of the Master of Calligraphy are." The cavalrymen of Divine Hall guarded the carriage in the center and remained very quiet. A beautiful girl sat calmly on the soft couch and was concentrating on picking the stamens for a pot of orchids in front of her. No one knew how she took care of the delicate orchids in the cold wilderness, but it was a pity that the girl herself was as quiet and pure as orchids. She actually took away all the colors of the pot of orchids. The camp of the grain team and the horse gang had been fighting fiercely since the early morning. They were already exhausted, and the groans of more than 100 wounded people gradually died down. Countless corpses were placed in the middle of the camp. The carriages were badly damaged and some of them were scorched black. They looked shaky and could not withstand another attack from the horse gang. The people in the camp had already fallen into despair. At this time, they suddenly saw a cavalryman of Divine Hall coming from the meadow. They thought they saw hope, so they were ecstatic and even burst into tears. Mo Shanshan, who had been sitting silently in the carriage, put down her writing brush and finally relaxed after confirming the arrival of the reinforcements. However, after waiting for a moment, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow slowly advanced, but did not come to help or charge. The cheers in the camp involuntarily subsided, and people became very confused and uneasy. Some Yen soldiers realized that the formation of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall should be used to suppress, not to attack. This speculation spread to everyone in the camp at a very fast speed, and immediately led to a new round of despair and pain. They saw hope and despair, but then fell into despair again, and watched the hope not far away fall into despair. No matter how strong-willed they were, no matter how pious they were to Haotian Taoism, and no matter how respectful they were to the Divine Hall, they could not help crying and then becoming angry. Countless cries and curses sounded in the camp. It was noisy. People used all the dirty words they could think of to curse the cold-blooded cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow to vent their despair and anger. Zhuo Zhihua tightly pursed her lips, looking at the cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow and the old woman in a cloth robe in front of them. Although she did not speak, her eyes were burning with the flame of hatred. Her right shoulder was cut by the horse gang's scimitar. After a simple dressing, it was still bleeding. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden were sent to the wilderness by the Divine Hall to carry out such a difficult task. It was because of the old woman of the Yueluan kingdom that the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were sent by the Divine Hall to the wilderness to carry out such a difficult task. But today, in the face of a desperate situation, the old woman completely ignored the friendship of the righteous faction and looked on coldly. It was really shameful. Cat Girl said angrily, "That old woman is a bastard. But how can the cavalrymen of Divine Hall not help her? Don't they know that they will be punished by the judicial department for disobeying the doctrine?" Zhuo Zhihua showed a disdainful look and fiercely spat at her feet. She thought that the cavalrymen of Divine Hall were originally under the jurisdiction of the judicial department. Who dared to say that they disobeyed the doctrine and behaved shamelessly? Ning Ke lifted his bamboo hat and looked above the meadow. This was the first time for him to see the real appearance of the papal guardians of West Hill Divine Palace. Thinking of the legendary brightness and majesty of this cavalryman and their actions at this time, he could not help but have some mixed feelings. In any case, these disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom are here to help the Yen Kingdom under the edict of the Divine Hall. Why are these cavalrymen of Divine Hall not willing to help? Ning Ke touched his bloody face and thought with emotion, "It turns out that there are people in this world who are more shameless than me. After all, I still underestimated the shamelessness of this world." The arrival of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall also had a great impact on the horse gang. Although they obviously did not intend to help the camp under the meadow, the prestige of the apologetic Divine Army had spread far and wide. Even though there were only 100 cavalrymen, they still frightened hundreds of horse gang and dared not to act rashly. The battle formation shrank and several leaders rode back to the meadow to ask for orders. Facing the pressure of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, the horse gang suddenly became nervous. One of them asked for instructions in a slightly trembling voice, "Your Excellency, we can't defeat the people from the Divine Hall. We'd better retreat. Even if we can kill those people in the camp, I'm afraid that it will be disadvantageous to the general if the Divine Hall finds out that we are involved in this matter." The leader of the horse gang indifferently looked at the cavalrymen of Divine Hall in the distance. His complicated laughter came out from the mask. "Do you want to wait for both sides to be disabled before taking action? After so many years, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall are still so petty and meticulous. I really don't know why they are so famous." Then he looked at the subordinates beside him and said calmly, "Even if we all die, how can the Divine Hall find out who we are? Don't you know how to scratch all your faces before you die?" One of the important purposes of the leader of the horse gang to besiege the grain team was to exhaust all the horse gang to death. Naturally, he would not cherish the lives of his subordinates. As for the cavalrymen of Divine Hall in the distance on the meadow, he was not afraid at all. It was said that the apologetic divine army of Divine Hall was the most elite cavalry in the world. But as an important figure of the Empire's border army, he would not take them seriously. Even if there were hidden strong cultivators among them, they should not be determined to stop him at a great cost according to the current situation. Let's go down together. The leader of the horse gang gently lifted the reins and kicked the horse's belly with his heels. Then he slowly went down the meadow. A moment ago, Ning Ke was ready to escape. A moment later, Ning Ke saw the arrival of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. Since then, he did not need to escape anymore. The next moment, Ning Ke saw the cavalrymen of Divine Hall under the bright armor and decided not to escape anymore. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow happened to block the best escape route he had planned. But this was not the main reason why he decided to stay and fight with the girls of the Great River Kingdom. If the cavalrymen of Divine Hall came to help at this time, they would be exhausted and the horse gang would definitely be defeated. Of course, there would be casualties among the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, but there would be less casualties among the more than 200 people in the camp. The reason why the cavalrymen of Divine Hall did not move forward was that these cavalrymen of Divine Hall and those unknown nobles valued their lives much more than the lives of these common people. The Divine Hall was famous for its light, but they behaved so shamelessly. Although he sometimes behaved shamelessly, he was still ashamed to be classified as the cavalryman of Divine Hall. Moreover, he was very clear that these cavalrymen of Divine Hall were the subordinates of Prince Long Qing. And he and Prince Long Qing could only stand on the two sides of the river at any time and in any place. Moreover, the vigilance and uneasiness from the horse gang still existed. He still felt that someone was indifferently watching him. Under the gaze of the Divine Hall, he could not get rid of this vigilance and uneasiness, so he had to erase this emotion. Walking to the side of the horse carriage and looking at the big package quietly lying on the carriage board, Ning Ke frowned. Thinking that the people of the Divine Hall above the meadow were watching here, he decided not to use the primordial 13 arrows. Because according to second brother, the lowest standard for him to use the primordial 13 arrows in the wilderness was Prince Long Qing. He pulled out something that looked like a stick tightly wrapped in coarse cloth. At this time, of course, he had to carry something to save his life. Can you still use talismans? Ning Ke looked at Mo Shanshan's pale face and asked. Mo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him as if she was looking at the horse gang that was regrouping. She did not answer him, but slowly raised her right hand and held a piece of yellowish paper between her two slender fingers. Ning Ke's eyes fell on the yellow paper between her slender fingers and then he said, "This time, you have to cooperate well and be fierce enough." Mo Shanshan withdrew her gaze, her eyelashes resting quietly on her white skin, and nodded. Ning Ke jumped off the horse carriage and reached out to call Cat Girl. He said, "It's meaningless to keep food and water at this time. Go and prepare a big bucket of water for me." Cat Girl did not understand, but went to prepare the water. He led the big black horse to the periphery of the camp. At first, his pace was very gentle. Then it became a trot. Gradually, it became a trot. He turned over and rode on the horse's belly, urging the big black horse to rush out like a black lightning. Like an arrow, it rushed directly to the horse gang leader who had just come down from the meadow. The boxwood bowstring vibrated slightly. An arrow was the first to fly out. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 221. Ning Ke's archery was the best in the world. Whether it was the grassland barbarians who were good at riding and shooting or the horse gang who relied on bows and arrows for a living, they were no match for him. In addition to his accuracy and skill in controlling the bow, the speed of the arrow was even more amazing. At this moment, he suddenly pulled the bow and shot the arrow with the momentum of running forward. The arrow was as fast as lightning. The bowstring of the boxwood bow was still slightly trembling in the wind, but the arrowhead had already flown in front of the horse gang leader's face and was about to hit him. At this critical moment, a small round shield came from the side of the horse gang leader and blocked the arrow by a hair's breadth. The muffled sound was like the beating of a drum. The horse gang holding the shield gave a muffled groan and his mount took 2 steps back. The horse gang leader behind the shield not only did not dodge, but his expression did not change at all. It was not because Ning Kei's arrow was too fast for him to react, but because he knew that the arrow could not hurt him. At that moment, the horse gang leader and his trusted subordinates came down from the meadow and entered the horse gang, who had already set up a charging formation, causing some chaos. Ning Kei saw the right opportunity and thought that he could hurt the other party. He did not expect that the other party could so easily block the arrow. It was obvious that the other party was well prepared. Ning Kei could not help but feel a chill in his heart. The muffled sound of the arrows piercing deep into the round shields was like a signal to charge. Under the stimulation of the great rewards and the threat of severe punishment, the 200 mounted bandits who were still able to mount their horses and fight in the open shouted crazily. They waved the scimitars in their hands and followed the leader of the 10 or so mounted bandits at the front as they charged towards the camp of the grain team. Because the distance was shortened in advance, the gravel area at the edge of the meadow could no longer stop the horse gang's charge. The outside of the camp of the grain team was already in ruins. The surviving 200 soldiers and civilians of Yan Kingdom stood in front of their seriously injured companions and the corpses of their companions. Their bloody hands holding the weapons trembled slightly and their eyes were filled with despair. The disciples of Black Ink Garden who were guarding the breach still could not recover their strength after this period of rest. Their psyche power was almost exhausted and they could not even hold their swords in their hands. How could they resist? In the carriage at the back, the young girl, Mo Shanshan, lowered her head slightly. A few strands of black hair hung weakly in front of her forehead. Her pale cheeks made her look particularly haggard. Her fingers secretly gripped the ink brush so tightly that they turned white. She looked so weak. The horse gang rushed to the camp. It seemed that no one could stop the coming massacre. Only Ning Kei rode the big black horse and rushed to the horse gang like a tide. He looked brave, but he was only one person. What could he do? Ning Kei saw the masked leader at the forefront of the horse gang through the damaged carriage board. Their eyes finally met in the cold air of the wilderness. Somehow, Ning Kei felt that his heart was beating faster. The vigilance and uneasiness that had troubled him for a long time became stronger and stronger. However, at this moment, there was no time for him to think, ponder, or hesitate. He was already on the horse, so he had to bring out the spirit of a thief on the horse, draw his bow, and swing his sword to kill everyone. The big black horse's breath was heavy, but it did not slow down. In the blink of an eye, it had rushed to the front of the carriage. At this moment, Ning Kei abandoned his bow and reached for the hilt behind him, shouting. He did not shout any specific words. It was just a very simple explosive sound, like the roar of some beasts in the mountains. However, he believed that the young girl in the carriage should be able to understand what he wanted to express. Although they had not discussed it in advance, he did not know why he felt that she should understand, just like Sang Sang. Mo Shanshan, who was in the carriage, understood. The black hair hanging in front of her forehead slightly narrowed, and her 2 slender fingers gently pressed together, like 2 stones heavily hitting each other. The yellowish talisman paper between her fingers actually broke into countless small pieces in an instant, as fine as yellow sand, and then disappeared. In the wilderness in front of the camp and the carriage, the chi of heaven and earth suddenly fluctuated violently. An extremely dry smell suddenly appeared. The horse gang, who had been seriously injured before, felt this horrible smell and subconsciously pulled the reins, trying to avoid to the sides. There were no sparks and no dry grass. Right in front of the broken formation of wagons, a raging fire appeared out of nowhere. The fierce tongues of fire leaped up with every breath of the wind in the wilderness, and in the midst of ostentatiously growing a few centimeters, forming a wall of fire. In fact, the power of the Fire Talisman Master's burning fire talisman was not as strong as before. After all, she had consumed too much psyche power. It was just that she had to defend against the horse gang's attacks from all directions, so the area covered by the fire talisman was too large. This time, the fire talisman only needed to cover a few feet in front of the big black horse, so it seemed particularly fierce. The wall of fire outside the camp was powerful, but in fact, it did not cause much damage to the horse gang. Moreover, it just happened to block in front of the big black horse, as if it was going to swallow the big black horse and Ning Kei on it. Just before the big black horse was about to rush into the wall of fire, Ning Kei turned over and mounted on the horse. He heavily stamped his feet on the saddle, and the muscles of his waist, abdomen, and legs suddenly tightened and released. He jumped up suddenly. The big black horse roared violently, and the tip of its hooves deeply pressed into the mud. It forcibly stopped its heavy body. When it was about to touch the wall of fire, it changed its running track dangerously, and rubbed the wall of fire to the right to avoid. At this time, Ning Kei had already jumped over the wall of fire. The soles of his boots rubbed the horrible tongue of fire, and he jumped over there. He held the hilt on his back with both hands, and took advantage of the momentum to pull forward. With two clangs, the padao was unsheathed. The wall of fire blocked the sight of the horse gang, so they did not see Ning Kei jump from the back of the horse. When they saw Ning Kei jump over the wall of fire, Ning Kei had already arrived in the air in front of the horse gang leader. Before the battle, he had told Amo Shanshan that the horse gang would be in chaos if they killed the leader who just arrived last night. And if the horse gang was in chaos at this time, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall would never miss such a great opportunity. He was sure that these people in Divine Hall were as shameless as him, so he could guess what they would choose. So he did not hesitate to let the weak young talisman master squeeze out the last psyche power to create this opportunity. He was very good at jumping over the wall of fire and making a sudden attack. When he killed Xiaoho's group of 3 people outside the entrance of Northern Mountain Road, he had done this. So he was very confident. He stared at the horse gang leader attentively and calmly, and the padao in his hands turned into 2 bright blades of light, and chopped down firmly and persistently. However, when he jumped out of the wall of fire and met the eyes of the horse gang leader again in the air, he found that the eyes of the horse gang leader seemed to be even more attentive and calm than his. The coldness in his heart when he was sprinting before could not help but increase. The 2 padaos cut through the winter wind of the wilderness and chopped at the neck of the horse gang leader. However, the horse gang on the left and right sides of the horse gang leader seemed to have already known the direction of Ning Kei's blade, and made a prediction in advance. They stretched out 2 thick wooden shields to block the blade. 2 heavy muffled sounds reverberated, and numerous cracks suddenly appeared on the wooden shields like spider webs. Ning Kei, who had no leverage in the air, was also shaken to the air diagonally backward by the countershock force. The 2 padaos were wedged between the wooden shields and could not be pulled back. Because the horse gang's mounts were still moving forward, when Ning Kei fell from the air for the second time, he just happened to rush directly to the horse gang leader. In the air, his right hand reached behind him like lightning and pulled out the 3rd blade. And almost at the same time, a spark burst in front of the horse gang leader. Although it was not vigorous, it was enough to burn his face. It was the talisman Taoism ability that Ning Kei had hidden. An invisible force appeared in the air, tightly wrapping the ball of fire transformed from the fu paper. The sparks suddenly became weak, as if they were sealed by a transparent glass ball. The fire rubbed the shoulder of the horse gang leader weakly and fell down. The horse gang leader turned over his right hand, and a hard metal shield appeared in the air, which happened to block Ning Kei's 3rd blade with all his strength. The blade and the shield collided with each other and made a loud noise, shaking the air for a while. The 3 padaos were all predicted and sealed in advance, and the talisman Taoism secretly used was also cracked. The horse gang leader seemed to know all his means and had a plan to deal with him. In a flash, he finally understood one thing. The target of these horse gang following the grain team was not to rob the grain, nor the young talisman master in the horse carriage, but himself from the beginning to the end. In the cold winter wind of the wilderness, Ning Kei's body and mood were extremely cold. Coldness did not mean despair, and he had never given up such a thing in his mind. He was in the air, with a muffled sound, the psyche power in his sense of perception was forced out, and the fine talisman on the padao in his hands suddenly brightened. At the same time, the talisman on the other two padaos embedded in the wooden shields was also brightened. With a few crisp sounds, the wooden shields were all broken, and the two padaos fell to the ground. And the third padao in his hand chopped against the wind, with a bright blade light, rolling the aura between heaven and earth, and chopped the horse gang leader again. Black sand flew all over the ground, and a very deep blade mark appeared on the ground. But the horse gang leader was safe and sound. Ning Kei's blade that contained the chi of heaven and earth actually chopped the ground. His vision was blurred, and he suddenly felt something was wrong. But he had no time to make any response. His body suddenly flew into the air again, and blood suddenly sprayed out from his mouth and nose. The horse gang leader slightly raised his head, and indifferently looked at Ning Kei, who was spraying blood in the air. His left hand that had been hanging beside the saddle stopped to calculate quickly, and he thought to himself, I took the risk to approach you, and finally locked you. Ning Kei flew in the air, and blood sprayed out from his mouth and nose like a fountain. A very vigorous and powerful psyche power, following an invisible track, rose from the ground, penetrated the air, pierced between his eyebrows, and directly drilled into his sense of perception. It seemed that there were countless needles stirring quickly in his brain, and an indescribable and absolute pain made his body tremble violently. He was a person who was good at enduring pain. Even the psyche power attack on the difficult mountain road in the academy's back mountain did not make him fall down. But the psyche power from the ground was so strong that even he could not bear it, and his consciousness instantly became blurred. Before falling into a coma or dying, the instinctive inertia that he had developed in the past 10 years of life and death made his hand subconsciously stretch to his back, and wanted to hold the familiar umbrella handle. However, under the attack of the powerful psyche power, his hand barely touched the umbrella handle, and there was no way to pull it out. His body began to fall. He struggled to open his eyes and looked at the ground with blurred vision. Looking at the horse gang leader who was looking up at him indifferently, he finally confirmed that this person was actually a psyche master in the upper see-through state. A psyche master in the upper see-through state was so noble and powerful. If he entered the military camp, he would be a general. If he entered the imperial court, he would be a minister of offerings. He would be respected in the world. Why would such a person pretend to be a horse gang to kill him? Ning Kei knew that he had underestimated the enemy. If he had known that the enemy's target was himself and that the opponent was a horrifying psyche master, he would definitely have used the primordial 13 arrows at the beginning. Although second brother had said so, the strength of the horse gang leader was not much weaker than that of Prince Long Qing. The horse gang leader, or Lin Ling, the psyche master of the northeast border military of the Tang Empire, slightly raised his head and squinted at Ning Kei, who was spitting blood in the air. His eyes were full of complex emotions, including complacency, fear, and pride. If the military wanted to investigate a person, they would definitely dig out all his background. The strength and fighting habits that Ning Kei showed at the entrance of the Northern Mountain Road and the fact that he followed Master Yen Sei to learn Talisman Taoism were all in his plan. A psyche master in the upper see-through state fought against a beginner in the no-doubt state who had made such careful and meticulous preparation. If he still could not kill the opponent, it could only mean that Haotian was too unreasonable. However, seeing that Ning Kei was about to die, Lin Ling still felt a little proud. Because although he was the most powerful psyche master in the northeast border military, the person he killed today was a student of the second floor of the academy and a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. So he was proud but also timid. So he decided that when he confirmed Ning Kei's death, he must immediately kill the confidants around him, and himself, so that this matter would not bring any trouble to the general. The carriage in the camp, which had been quiet for a long time, suddenly moved. Its movement was earth-shattering. The whole carriage disintegrated and scattered, and the curtain, wood, and metal ornaments were shot around like arrows. The carriage burst open, and the girl in white floated into the air. Her waterfall-like black hair was flying in the wind. She looked at the fire wall, and her unfocused eyes suddenly condensed. Two extremely abnormal blushes appeared on her pale cheeks, and she stretched out a finger. Her slender finger drew a few lines in the cold winter wind of the wilderness. The fingertip broke the air, the wind, and the heaven and earth, and an invisible force was generated with the drawing of the lines. Only the divine talisman master who had entered the knowing destiny state could draw the infinitive talisman. The girl in white's fingers trembled violently, as if she was suffering great pain. In the end, she could not finish the talisman, and only finished half of it. She indifferently glanced at the fire wall, and could vaguely see Ning Kei's figure falling at a high speed. She closed her eyes, leaned back, and fell to the ground. The unfinished talisman in the winter wind suddenly collapsed, and so did the surrounding space. In a very short time, it condensed into a transparent air mass. The invisible and transparent talisman power, like the fist of the god of heaven, violently rushed out from dozens of feet away, and broke a huge hole in the fire wall. More than 10 horse gang members spat out blood and fell off their horses. The horse gang leader's pupils shrank sharply. Even though he was a psyche master at the upper see-through state, he also felt the horror of this power. Even though this talisman was not finished, it was still the infinitive talisman that only the divine talisman master could understand. Divine talisman. Wednesday's task was completed. I'm really trying my best. Everyone, please stimulate me. I don't need tickets, just a few compliments. Please don't criticize or remind me recently. With my current mental state and ability, this is the best I can write. I try my best to ensure the quality and quantity. Criticism and suggestions have always been useless to me, and they can't help me write better, but compliments can really help. Good night, I wish everyone happiness. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 222. The commander of cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked down at the meadow without any expression on his face. He did not care about the life and death of the people in the camp of the grain team. He just wanted to see if there would be a suitable opportunity for him to send troops in the chaotic situation. Suddenly, a violent vibration of the chi of heaven and earth came from the meadow. The powerful and wonderful aura of talisman Taoism directly and clearly reflected in his sense of perception, which made his expression change dramatically. Kuni Mati, the old lady, was as hard as stone. When she saw the horse gang waving their machetes to kill the Yen soldiers who had no time to escape, the wrinkles on her face did not even tremble a little. But when the carriage was broken into pieces and the girl in white floated in the air to draw the talisman, the wrinkles on her face suddenly changed from the lines carved on the stone to the tangles in the wind. They all piled up together and she looked extremely shocked. The talisman master in the camp is actually her. She can actually draw the infinitive talisman? Has she already entered the knowing destiny state? Kuni Mati looked gloomy and looked back at the carriage in the middle of the cavalrymen. She secretly thought about how her niece, who was spoiled and treasured by her, would react if she knew this fact. The curtain of the carriage was closed. The girl who was as quiet and pure as an orchid felt the terrible talisman power from the meadow. She slowly raised her head and revealed a trace of understanding on her face. She whispered to herself, "It turns out to be Sister Mo." Through the curtain, she could guess who the talisman master was just by the fluctuation of the talisman power. It seemed that this flower-like girl was not ignorant of what happened under the meadow outside the carriage. The half-divine talisman turned into an invisible high-speed air mass. Like a giant fist made by a god, it instantly tore the air above the camp and punched a huge hole in the wall of fire. More than 10 horse gang members were killed by the shock. Then it came to the horse gang leader and suddenly condensed with the winter wind. The leader of the horse gang knew that his life was at stake at this critical moment. With a muffled groan, his fingers hanging on the side of the saddle trembled violently. His thumb tapped on the lines of his middle and index fingers at high speed, forcing out all the psyche power in his sense of perception. The strong psyche power accumulated by decades of meditation left his body and fiercely collided with the power of the divine talisman. The strange power collided, causing the air around the horse gang leader to have countless strange white lines. These white lines were extremely fine turbulence in the air. Because of the difference in speed with the surrounding air flow, it caused the light to be refracted greatly, which was why it appeared white. Being able to tear the seemingly empty air to such an unbearable extent and make it howl in the tiniest of places, one could imagine how terrifying the collision between the half-divine talisman and the Psyche Master's decades of cultivation power was. In the countless air turbulence that was like willow catkins dancing wildly, a few drops of blood splashed out from the corner of the eyes of the leader of the horse gang. The horse under him was whining and retreating in disorder. Because this incomplete divine talisman was too powerful, the horse gang leader had to concentrate all his psyche power to fight against it. Naturally, there was a very short period of blankness in the psyche power attack of Ning Ke, who was falling from the sky while spurting blood. The tens of thousands of steel needles in Ning Ke's sense of perception suddenly disappeared. The pain remained in his consciousness, but he finally woke up from the blurred state for a moment. All he needed was a moment of clarity. He pulled out the big black umbrella on his back. With a shake of his wrist, the coarse cloth was torn. The big black umbrella, wrapped in layers of cloth, which had not seen the sun for several months, suddenly saw the light again. Like a black lotus, it bloomed on top of his head. The big black umbrella slowed down his falling speed, so that he would not fall to his death. More importantly, the big black umbrella looked extremely greasy and dirty, but it actually absorbed most of the horrible psyche power attack from below. His body was still floating in the air, and Ning Ke's hand holding the pedao had already waved over. At this time, there was still some distance between him and the horse gang leader below, so the pedao could not cut him. But a silver needle broke through the air from his wrist. Like the scenes that happened every day in the back of the mountain of the academy, it followed the strange and elusive dark lines and directly pierced the eyes of the horse gang leader. The horse gang leader was a psyche master in the upper see-through state, and his cultivation state was similar to that of the girl in white, Mo Shanshan. But it was still difficult for him to deal with the incomplete divine talisman, and his whole body was bound by the dangerous primordial chi turbulence in the air. What was more, he did not expect that Ning Ke, who was seriously injured and about to die, would still hide such a sinister move. Seeing that the extremely dim and almost invisible silver thread was about to pierce his eyes, he could not avoid it. He could only take the risk of ignoring the turbulence in front of him and forced himself to lower his head. With a poof, the silver needle instantly pierced into his brow bone. The end of the silver needle could not be seen, and a drop of blood like a red mole suddenly appeared in it. The horse gang leader only felt a sharp pain in his head, and he could not help but blacked out. The blacking out was not completely caused by the injury caused by the pain, but really blacked out. Because the big black umbrella floated over. Under the big black umbrella, the pedao in Ning Ke's hand directly chopped out, and the momentum of the knife was concise and clear. The blade entered the flesh and then broke the bone. It was just a matter of a moment. With a swish, the arm flew to the sky. A terrible bloody wound appeared on the right shoulder of the horse gang leader, and blood gushed out like a fountain. The momentum of the pedao was not exhausted. He cried out in pain and fell to the rear of the horse, falling heavily to the ground. Just before landing, his skinny right hand pointed to Ning Ke, who was about to fall on his back, and suddenly opened it. Ning Ke was seriously injured again, and his chest and abdomen were suffocated. He spat out blood again and fell down. He just fell on the horse that originally belonged to the horse gang leader. He did not feel the sweet and fishy taste between his lips and tongue. Before his consciousness was blurred, the pedao in his hand broke the wind and chopped again. But it was not the horse gang leader who had been shaken off, but the horse's buttocks. A deep bloody wound suddenly appeared on the horse's buttocks. The horse was shocked by the pain, and madly rushed forward, bumping into the still burning wall of fire. There was another hole below the transparent hole in the wall of fire in front of the camp, which was pierced by the divine talisman. A burning galloping horse, carrying the seriously injured and weak Ning Ke, roared out of the hole. The horse's mane and tail had already been burned to ashes, and the galloping horse's body was spitting fire. The fire caused by the burning fire talisman was extremely terrible. The galloping horse forcibly rushed through and was instantly burned to death, falling heavily to the ground. Ning Ke on the horse's back fell to the ground with a bang at the same time, rolling several times continuously before stopping. Although he was protected by the big black umbrella, the corners of his clothes were still spitting fire, which could be ignited at any time. He sat on the ground awkwardly, turned his head to look at a place, and shouted in a hoarse voice, "Water." According to his previous instructions, Cat Girl prepared a large bucket of water and waited by his side. She had not participated in the defense. Seeing her senior sisters fighting with the horse gang, she was so anxious that she wanted to kick over the bucket of water. She did not expect that the battle situation would change so quickly, and it was not until now that she understood Ning Ke's previous intention. With a splash, the whole bucket of water was poured on Ning Ke's body. The burning fire on his clothes was instantly extinguished, and his weak body was directly knocked to the ground by the bucket of water that was poured on his head. The big black horse galloped from one side of the camp to the front of him. It lowered its head and kept nudging Ning Ke's body, looking very anxious and uneasy. It seemed that it was worried that after Ning Ke fell down, he would never be able to stand up again. Ning Ke fell on the wet ground and indeed had no strength to stand up. Fortunately, he did not pass out. He opened his eyes and looked at the horse's face that was very close to his face, and a very difficult smile appeared on his face. Since the beginning of the war, especially when he assassinated the leader of the horse gang, he had encountered countless extremely dangerous situations and innumerable pain. According to the requirements of human instinct, when faced with the pain that the body and spirit could not bear, he would automatically pass out. However, he seemed to have some kind of talent that went against the body's instinct, and forcibly maintained the last trace of consciousness. He raised his right arm with difficulty and put the big black umbrella that looked dirtier than before on his chest. Then he put the brocade bag that had been tied on his middle finger into his arms. After doing these two things, he was really relieved, but still did not pass out because of mental relaxation. He stabbed the tip of the knife into the wetland beside him, and stood up with a muffled groan. Looking at the fighting sounds coming from the camp, he wanted to go and help, but found that his body, which had been seriously injured by the psyche power, did not listen to his orders. He had done what he should do, so he should not die, right? As for those people who were bathed in blood and fighting around the carriage array, he could not change anything at this time. Thinking of something, Ning Ke looked back. In the middle of the messy camp, the carriage that had already collapsed into pieces was only left with a board at the bottom. Mo Shanshan was currently sitting on that board. Her white robes were covered in mud for an unknown amount of time. The young talisman master had previously forcibly used the divine talisman that only divine talisman masters could use, which was beyond her state ability. She had suffered a very serious backfire, and the psyche power in her sense of perception had been squeezed out, so she directly passed out in the air and fell down. Perhaps because of the shock, Mo Shanshan had already woken up at this time. She slightly lowered her head, and the black hair on her forehead was very messy. Her right hand was pressed on the ground to support her body, and the slender eyelashes vaguely visible among her hair kept trembling. Her pale cheeks were full of weakness, and it seemed that she would faint again at any time. Suddenly there came a faint sound like thunder in the distance. Looking at the smoke and dust above the meadow, Ning Ke knew that the team of cavalrymen of Divine Hall was tempted as he had expected. He said to Cat Girl beside him, when cleaning up the battlefield later, "Grab my 2 knives for me." The fire wall in front of the camp was mainly to create a chance for Ning Ke to assassinate the leader of the horse gang. The coverage area was not large, and it was far from enough to stop those horse gangs. During the time of the previous tangled battle, the horse gang rushed in, waving their cutlasses and whistling. At this time, the array of carriages composed of carriage boards and grain bags had long been damaged. The Black Ink Garden disciples' knives were like snow, and they resolutely fought against them without retreating. Those soldiers and civilians of Yan Kingdom suffered heavy casualties in a very short time. At this time, the leader of the horse gang was nowhere to be found. It was unknown whether he was seriously injured and taken away by his trusted subordinates, or he was already dead, and his body was trampled into mud by the hooves of the horses. This fact brought a great impact to the horse gang. The charging formation of the horse gang was already in a mess, but the defense power in the camp was also on the verge of a desperate situation. If the cavalrymen of Divine Hall above the meadow still did not move at this time, then no one could predict whether the camp would be massacred first, or the horse gang would collapse first under the pressure. The bigwigs on the meadow were all shocked by Mo Shanshan's shocking half-divine talisman, so they did not pay much attention to Ning Ke, who jumped over the fire wall and finally killed the leader of the horse gang. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall sensed something, and his sharp eyes noticed a faint black shadow on the other side of the raging fire wall, but he did not see the specific situation at that time. But he saw that the leader of the horse gang was seriously injured and then was forcibly taken away by several cavalrymen. He also saw that the horse gang was in chaos and the signs of collapse at this time. They did not rush down the meadow to rescue people in the camp before because the 200 or 300 fierce horse gang were well guarded and good at fighting. The commander did not want to risk the noble lives of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. But now the leader of the horse gang was dead, and the collapse was inevitable. It was a good chance for the cavalrymen of Divine Hall to show their strength and collect military achievements. As a leader who was good at fighting, he certainly would not miss this opportunity. The horse gang is killing the followers of Haotian. As the papal guardians of Divine Hall, you know what to do. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall drew out the sword at his waist, pointed at the chaotic camp of the grain team below the meadow, and said in a low voice. The sun shone on his serious and righteous face, which looked extremely holy. For the light, go forward. 100 cavalrymen of Divine Hall moved according to the order. They held the weapons engraved with talismans in their hands, lifted the reins and whipped the horses. They rushed from the meadow to the camp at a high speed, kicking up a lot of gravel. The black armors were painted with complicated golden patterns, which looked like countless blooming sunflowers in the sun, shining. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall began their rescue operation with the spirit of justice and fearlessness. Facing the papal guardians, who were the most elite cavalrymen in the world, the horse gang was exhausted after fighting for half a day. And because their leader was seriously injured and escaped, they fell into panic and confusion. They had no ability to resist and were defeated again and again. Even the fiercest and most powerful horse gang was no match for the ordinary cavalrymen of Divine Hall, not to mention that the machetes in their hands were as vulnerable as branches and wooden sticks in front of the talisman soldiers of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. It did not take long for the cavalrymen of Divine Hall to defeat all the horse gang around the camp. They only paid a small price, and the commander's idea and plan were perfectly realized. The light won again. The 600 horse gang suffered heavy casualties, and the remaining horse gang scattered. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall had to clean up the battlefield, collect the heads, and protect the nobles above the meadow. They only chased the horse gang symbolically. So the horse gang, who had been fighting with the 200 cavalrymen of Yan Kingdom, also took the opportunity to escape. The fight in the meadow was fierce, and so were the 200 cavalrymen of Yan Kingdom and the horse gang. At this time, there were only about 40 cavalrymen of Yan Kingdom who could ride back to the camp, and everyone was wounded. The battle started in the morning, and people kept dying. But relying on the formation of carriages and the bravery of the disciples of Black Ink Garden, not many people died. The most serious casualties appeared at the end. The broken formation of carriages and Mo Shanshan, whose psyche power was exhausted, could no longer protect more people. Countless soldiers and civilians of Yan Kingdom were killed by the machetes of the horse gang. A young male disciple of Black Ink Garden was attacked by several red-eyed horse gang and died tragically. Zhuozhihua and other girls of the Great River Kingdom stood in front of the dead body of their junior brother. Their eyes were full of sadness and anger. Cat Girl, the youngest among them, could not help crying, and her eyes were red. There was a sad atmosphere in the camp, and dense hoofbeats sounded outside the camp. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall finished the short-distance chase of the scattered horse gang and regrouped. Their black armor with golden flower patterns shone dazzlingly in the sun. The neat formation looked strict, and the light was full of pressure. In normal times, the soldiers and civilians of the Yen Kingdom who believed in Haotian Taoism in the camp would look at them with admiration, or even kneel on the ground and kowtow devoutly out of absolute awe of the Westhill Divine Palace. However, at this moment, the people who were shrouded in sadness did not pay attention to the cavalrymen of Divine Hall outside the camp. Occasionally, some people looked over, and their eyes were so cold and numb, even with a hint of hatred. If these cavalrymen of Divine Hall had not waited on the meadow, and had chosen to rush to the camp at the first time, and cooperated with the disciples of Black Ink Garden, especially the powerful female talisman master, they could definitely defeat the horse gang. However, they did not do so, and directly led to the camp suffering heavy casualties at the last moment. At this time, many cold bodies lying on the ground of the wilderness should still be warm. Many dead people could have survived and returned to the Yen Kingdom to see their relatives. However, because of the selfishness and coldness of these cavalrymen of Divine Hall, all the possibilities did not exist. In this case, no one in the camp would welcome the arrival of this group of cavalrymen of Divine Hall. People could never see the back of their heads, and light could never see its own darkness, especially when you thought you were very high, and when you thought you were absolutely bright. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall lined up outside the camp did not think that there was anything wrong with their previous action of not moving. At that time, the horse gang still had enough fighting power. Did they want the noble cavalrymen of Divine Hall to risk their lives and bleed for the common people? On the contrary, in their view, it was still the cavalrymen of Divine Hall who finally defeated the horse gang and saved the lives of the people in the camp. They deserved to be appreciated and grateful, instead of the cold, indifferent and even hateful eyes now. Some cavalrymen of Divine Hall could not help showing a trace of contempt and anger on their indifferent and serious faces. If the commander had given the order, they might even have rushed into the camp, dragged out the few civilians who dared to cast hateful eyes on them, and severely whipped them. Looking at the indifferent faces of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall outside the camp, and thinking of their previous cold-blooded shamelessness and their current disgusting expressions, Cat Girl was so angry that her face turned red. She raised her arm to wipe her tears, and was about to rush out to scold them. Zhuozhihua pulled her behind her, and forcibly suppressed the sadness and anger in her heart. She bowed to the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall who sat high on the horse without saying anything, and began to deal with the funeral affairs in the camp with her junior sisters. The so-called funeral affairs were all sad things. The soldiers of Yen Kingdom who were covered with wounds supported each other. Looking at the corpses of their companions lying everywhere, and the broken limbs and pools of blood, they could not feel the lucky joy of surviving a disaster. Many people began to wail loudly, and the cries in the camp shook the sky. There is another chapter of 5,000. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 223. Listening to the continuous crying in the camp, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly frowned. He could understand the indifference of the disciples of Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom, but he did not care about their indifference. Instead, he was a little disdainful and sarcastic. Ignoring them, he raised his right hand and signaled his subordinates to start cleaning the battlefield. The cold and gorgeous sword edge pierced into the neck of the horse gang and cut off the head with a twist and a cut. Regardless of whether the dead horse gang's eyes were open or closed, the commander threw the head into the big bag. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall began to harvest the heads of the horse gang. Although many horse gangs outside the camp died in the first counterattack in the morning, died in the talisman fire, and died in the desperate resistance of the grain team. At this moment, no one would compete with the cavalrymen of Divine Hall for military merits. People in the camp were busy treating the seriously injured, moving the corpses, cleaning up the losses, saving the few remaining provisions, and dispelling the sadness and anger in their hearts. With the broken and scorched cart formation as the dividing line, the inside and outside of the camp were naturally divided into two worlds. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at the ruined camp and the obvious traces of the battle. He imagined the charge of the horse gang and the fierce battle the camp had withstood before the arrival of the reinforcements, and could not help but feel a little admiration. His eyes fell on the wreckage of the carriage in the center of the camp, and his pupils slightly shrank. He did not find the figure of the young talisman master, nor the black shadow. After a moment of silence, he lightly kicked the horse's abdomen and urged the horse to pass through a gap in the cart formation. He came to the back of the disciples of Black Ink Garden who were busy treating the injured, and asked, "Who is in charge here?" Zhuozhihua forcefully tied a piece of cloth to the bleeding wound of a civilian's broken arm, and gently lifted the hair coagulated by the blood in front of her forehead. She turned to look at the commander on the horse, but did not answer him. A disciple of Black Ink Garden heard the question and subconsciously looked back at a carriage in the camp. Cat Girl suddenly thought of what Ning Kei had told her before. She handed the medicine in her hand to a senior sister next to her and trotted out of the camp. In addition to the mules and horses, there were 3 carriages in the grain delivery team. Among them, the carriage where the young talisman master was in had been shattered into pieces by the power of the half-divine talisman, while the other 2 carriages were intact. The big black horse was waiting outside one of the carriages, kicking its hooves in boredom. The interior of the carriage was dim. Only when the winter wind of the wilderness lifted a corner of the curtain did the interior become a little brighter. There was a parcel lying quietly on the board of the carriage. Judging from the sunken surface of the board, the parcel was obviously not as heavy as it was. Ning Kei reached out to wipe off the blood oozing out of his mouth and nose. He then reached into the basin beside him and washed it with clean water. Then, he took a small copper box and opened it. Looking at the shabby things in the box, he could not help but shake his head. "You're a girl, why do you only have so little makeup?" "It's not mine, it's theirs." Mo Shanshan, who was sitting on the opposite side, looked at Ning Kei attentively. It seemed that only by concentrating could she make her unfocused and indifferent eyes fall on his face. At this time, there was some doubt in her eyes. "As far as I know, girls in the Great River Kingdom attach great importance to makeup. Last year, there was a popular eyebrow-raising makeup in Chang'an City. I heard that it was spread from your country. Why don't you people care about it?" Ning Kei lowered his head to grind the powder. His movements seemed very skillful and experienced. "Cultivators don't need to care about makeup." Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly. Seeing that he didn't want to discuss this issue, her black and beautiful eyebrows slowly furrowed. She asked, "Why do you need makeup?" Ning Kei raised his head and reached out to lift the hair in front of her forehead. His fingers moved casually and combed the waterfall-like black hair into shape. Then, he picked up a very delicate wooden hairpin beside him and pinned it. "Because we need you to be very energetic now." He concentrated on picking the thickness of the rouge and casually explained, "The guys in the Divine Hall are all psychopaths. Although they are shameless, they won't go crazy at any time and place. But no one knows whether they will do something crazier to prevent their shamelessness from being spread." Ning Kei picked up a touch of rouge with his fingernail, thinned it, and then dipped it into a pure white cotton handkerchief specially found. He motioned the young talisman master to raise her face and said, "The only thing we can use to deter them now is you. So, you have to be energetic and can't be as weak as you are now. It seems that you will die at any time. What's the relationship between the two?" Mo Shanshan asked seriously. "Although you are known as the calligraphy addict and can deter those cavalrymen of Divine Hall, if you are too weak, it is easy to stimulate the madness of some psychopaths. Once they go crazy, they will not care whether you are one of the 3 addicts or the last disciple of the master of calligrapher Wang. I know this psychological factor is difficult to explain. You only need to know that many life and death fights in the world are often just because someone glanced at someone. Ning Ke guessed the real identity of Mo Shanshan from the shore of the Blue Lake in winter to the blood-soaked battle with her in the wilderness. It was also the first time that he made it clear in his words. There was only one young talisman master in the world who could draw half-divine talisman. Because there was only one calligraphy addict in the world. Mo Shanshan had been apprenticed to the master of calligrapher in Mogan Mountain since she was a child. She had been obsessed with calligraphy and talisman for more than 10 years and did not have much experience in the secular world. Facing Ning Ke, who had been killing people to survive since he was a child, she naturally felt that she could learn a lot. No one knew whether she understood Ning Ke's words or not. Anyway, she obediently raised her face. Her face was very small with slightly puffed cheeks and picturesque eyebrows. Although she was pale and haggard at the moment, she was still beautiful. Ning Ke held the small square handkerchief dipped in rouge and looked at the small face close to him. He was stunned for a moment and then smiled. 2 years ago, he was still killing horse gang, gambling, drinking and bullying Sang Sang in the city of Wei. He never thought that one day he would be in the same carriage with the calligraphy addict, one of the 3 addicts in the world, and that she would be so obedient and let him do whatever he wanted. He rubbed the rouge on her face with his fingers and it gradually dispersed. It was neither heavy nor light makeup. Mo Shanshan's pale face gradually became ruddy under his fingers. It felt good to rub the girl's face with his fingers, especially her slightly puffed cheeks, which were soft and tender. Mo Shanshan sat quietly with her head slightly lowered, letting him rub on her face with her eyelashes slightly trembling. Soon the makeup was finished. The girl's pale and haggard face looked fresh and beautiful, and the blush looked very real. Ning Ke wondered when his craftsmanship had become so good. Then he was going to draw her eyebrows, but he noticed that her eyebrows were thin and black, just as beautiful as the painting. After thinking for a moment, he finally put down the charcoal pen gently. Do you often do these things? Mo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly asked. Ning Ke thought of his home life after he entered Chang'an City and became a rich man. He thought of the large pile of rouge and powder of Chenjinji Cosmetics store hidden on the bed in the old brush pen shop. He smiled gently and said, I have a little girl at home, so I do these things a lot. Mo Shanshan's long and sparse eyelashes blinked, and she did not continue to ask anything. She turned around and lifted the curtain to look outside. Her cheeks that had just become ruddy became paler again. People in the camp were carrying the bodies of the dead and collecting wood. It seemed that they were going to cremate the dead. At the periphery of the camp, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had almost finished harvesting the heads of the horse gang. The black and gold-patterned armor of light was stained with blood, and the sacks were bulging with numerous heads. The Central Plains Coalition Army entered the wilderness to assist Yan Kingdom under the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace. Except for the Tang Army on the western battlefront, the eastern battlefront was determined by the heads. Today, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had harvested at least more than 300 heads, which was naturally a great achievement. Logically speaking, this achievement should mainly belong to the disciples of the Black Ink Garden and the soldiers and civilians of the Yan Kingdom. However, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall unscrupulously snatched the achievement. Although Mo Shanshan did not care about it, she could clearly feel that the people in the camp who were silently preparing for the cremation were becoming more and more sad and angry. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at the young talisman master who lifted the curtain and noticed that she was in good spirits. He could not help but secretly shiver, thinking that this girl had just taken a great risk to forcibly use the divine talisman across the state. He did not expect that she could recover in such a short time. She really deserved to be one of the 3 addicts in the world who were as famous as the priest. It turns out that Hill Master is in charge here. I didn't know it before, so the rescue came late. Please forgive me, Hill Master. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked calm. In one sentence, he forgot that he did not take any action and coldly watched the camp being attacked. He bowed with hands folded in front to show rare respect to the calligraphy addict Emo Shanshan, and then said, "Miss is in the carriage on the meadow now. She asked me to invite Hill Master to meet her." The papal guardians of the Western Church were directly managed by the judicial department. If the miss he mentioned was not the Tao addict Yi Hongyu, it must be the flower addict. Mo Shanshan was very clear about this, and she knew that the flower addict was above the meadow. The Black Ink Garden is ordered by the Divine Hall to escort the provisions into the palace. It is our duty and we dare not to leave. Mo Shanshan looked at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and said. The commander smiled slightly and said, "Miss and Hill Master have not seen each other for several years. She hopes to see you again." These words were said peacefully with affection, but indifferently revealed a hint of toughness. Mo Shanshan looked at him expressionlessly and said, "If she really wanted to see me, she could have come down from the meadow to see me. Since she did not see me before, there is no need to see me now." These words were said calmly with a hint of sarcasm, but it did not conceal the toughness. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked slightly gloomy and silently looked at her sitting in front of the carriage. No one knew what he was thinking about. Finally, he lifted the reins and left without saying a word. Outside the camp, a cavalryman of Divine Hall held 2 padeos and walked to the front of his horse. The commander looked at the complicated lines carved on the 2 padeos. Although he could not understand the meaning for a while, as a strong man in the see-through realm, he instinctively felt the hidden beauty and realm. His eyes brightened. Just when he was about to take the 2 padeos as trophies and study them in the future, a clear and angry voice sounded not far away. "Those are ours." Cat Girl angrily stared at the commander on the horse. Her face was covered with fine beads of sweat, and her body was covered with dust and blood stains. It seemed that she had been looking for the 2 padeos outside the camp for a long time. The commander smiled faintly and lifted the reins lightly to leave. He did not care about her at all. Cat Girl trotted quickly and rushed to the front of his horse like a gust of wind. Holding the ebony handle of her sword, she stared at him and refused to give way. She did not hide the hatred in her clear eyes. Several cavalrymen of Divine Hall unceremoniously stepped forward and tried to push her away. With a clear sound, Cat Girl unsheathed her sword. Looking at several cavalrymen of Divine Hall who were much taller than her, she showed no fear and said with a slightly trembling voice, "You have cut off the heads of the horse gang. Do you still want to rob our weapons?" The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at her coldly and said, "The disciples of Black Ink Garden use either talismans or swords. When did you start to use knives?" Zhuo Jihua and other disciples of Black Ink Garden saw the conflict here and rushed over. When they found that their petite junior sister was surrounded by these shameless cavalrymen of Divine Hall, they could not help bursting out their long-suppressed anger. The sound of the sword rubbing against the scabbard rang out and they confronted the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. The atmosphere in the field suddenly became extremely tense. Although hundreds of elite cavalrymen of Divine Hall took the lead, the number of Black Ink Garden disciples was very small and they were all exhausted. However, with their perseverance, they did not retreat even half a step. A winter wind blew in the meadow. Mo Shanshan walked over slowly with her white dress fluttering in the wind. She looked indifferent. She looked at the impatient cavalryman of Divine Hall and the commander on the horse and said indifferently, "Our disciples of Black Ink Garden can use knives whenever they want. Do we also need to explain to the Divine Hall about this kind of thing?" The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at her silently and suddenly said, "Hill Master's words seem a little unreasonable." Mo Shanshan said, "Do you mean that the Divine Hall now also thinks that thieves are reasonable?" The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly changed his expression and felt humiliated. He looked at her and those disciples of Black Ink Garden who were holding swords in front of the horse and said coldly, "How dare you compare the Divine Hall with thieves? So disrespectful." Do you want the judicial department to ask the sage of calligrapher how he teaches his disciple? Mo Shanshan calmly replied, I will wait for the great divine priest of judgment's words on behalf of my teacher. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall clearly guessed that the calligraphy addict should be forcing herself to be spirited at this time, but he did not dare to offend her at will. He stared at the young talisman master's eyes and suddenly said, Hill Master has been ordered by the Divine Hall to transport provisions into the palace. This matter is related to the peace negotiation between the two sides. Now the provisions have been destroyed. I don't know how you will explain to the Divine Hall and the coalition army. If the peace negotiation between the two sides is broken because of this, I don't know whether you can bear the responsibility. How to explain to the Divine Hall and the coalition army is my business. It has nothing to do with you. Mo Shanshan slightly blinked her eyelashes and softly said, Even if I don't explain, you can't kill me here. She raised her head and quietly looked at the eyes of the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, saying, Or kill all the people here. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly frowned. Mo Shanshan gently smoothed the hair that was blown to her cheeks by the wind to the back of her shoulders and calmly said, Since you won't kill all of us, then what are you still doing here? Put down the Pideos and go. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall was silent for a long time. He casually threw the 2 Pideos on the saddle to the ground and looked at her with a slight smile, saying, I hope to see Hill Master again in the palace. Cat Girl sheathed her sword and pushed away the cavalryman of Divine Hall in front of her. She rushed to the commander's horse and picked up the 2 Pideos. She tightly held them in her arms like treasures and stared at him vigilantly. Mo Shanshan did not respond to the invitation or threat of the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. She directly turned around and walked back to the camp. In the wilderness in the deep winter, the sun appeared along the low southern sky and soon disappeared. The battle started in the early morning. When the battlefield was cleaned up, it was almost dusk and the light became dim. The dense sound of horse hooves above the meadow sounded like thunder and then gradually became lower. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall escorted Aunt Cuny Maddie of Ueluan Kingdom, the girl in the carriage, and people from the Revelation Institute and the White Tower Temple. The blood-like dusk shrouded the camp, making the bloodstains on the ground and carriage boards even more dazzling. Broken carriage boards, carriage fragments, and hay were piled up together and seemed to be burning in the sunset. After a while, these things were really ignited. The fire became bigger in an instant with the help of the wind in the wilderness and gradually swallowed the bodies of the victims piled up on it. In the crackling sound, one could vaguely see the melted, scorched, and deformed bodies, which made people feel extremely confused and complicated. The air began to fill with a terrible and disgusting burnt smell. The survivors around the cremation ground lowered their heads and began to chant the reincarnation order from the Hautian Taoism song in unison. The monotonous syllables kept repeating, praying that the souls in the flame could smoothly return to the embrace of Hautian. The somewhat messy voice at first became more and more orderly, low, and full of compassion. Ning Kei did not get off the carriage because he was seriously injured. He lifted the curtain and silently looked at the flame in the distance, listening to the chanting and prayers of the people. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at the high and distant sky above his head. The sky in the wilderness was as clean as he was familiar with. But at this time, under the light of the sunset, it naturally divided into 2 different worlds. The near-night side was as blue as the sea, while the near-day side was burning like fire. He could not explain why he came to this world. In his childhood in Chang'an, he had been exposed to the faith of Hautian. His master, Master Yen Sei, was a minister of offerings in the South School of Hautian and a great divine priest with a seat in the West Hill Divine Palace. So he naturally believed in Hautian like most people in the world. However, at this moment, in front of the countless souls in the flame, under the sea and fiery sky, his view of the world was gradually changing uncontrollably. People set up camp again in the meadow and spent a long and cold night. The next morning, dozens of surviving cavalrymen of Yen Kingdom returned to the south with the wounded. They were the direct descendants of Crown Prince Chongming and knew very well why the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had such an attitude when they were attacked yesterday. They also knew that even if they went to the palace, they would not get any justice at all, and even had a great risk of being punished by the divine hall. So naturally, they chose to return. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom did not go south with the cavalrymen of Yen Kingdom. Instead, they took 2 carriages and several horses and set off again, heading northeast to the Lieutenant Palace. Looking at the desolate scenery and the remaining snow in the sparse grass outside the window, Ning Ke coughed twice and took out the handkerchief prepared by Sang Sang. He wiped the blood on the corner of his mouth and turned to look at the girl in white opposite him. He asked, "Why do you want to go to the palace?" The matter of the grain team needs an explanation, and Mo Shanshan slightly lowered her eyelashes and trembled slightly. After a long silence, she said, "I am very angry." Ning Ke looked at her and smiled. He said, "I find that I kind of like you." The task was completed on Thursday. I almost vomited from writing so much. There are still 3 days left. Oh my God, my dear ones, if you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 224. Hearing this, the young talisman master lowered her head and looked at the white dress on her knees. It seemed that the lace there was very beautiful, but in fact, the white dress was plain with nothing on it. The horse carriage was still moving forward. The wind in the wilderness lifted the curtain, and the morning sunshine shone in. The morning sunshine shone on the plain black and white decoration in the carriage, and on her black hair and white face, separating out a few wisps of light and shadow. A calm and affirmative voice slowly came from her lips. "I think, I already have someone I like." The morning sunshine also fell on Ning Quebec. He did not expect that his habitual way of speaking would cause the other party to misunderstand. He smiled awkwardly, and his smile looked very gentle in the morning sunshine. "I have a lot of people I like." Like is a common phrase that I use to express my kindness. I hope it won't make you feel too abrupt. The wilderness ground was blown dry and hard by the cold wind, and the wheels on it shook from time to time. The horse carriage was not big, and the 2 sat opposite each other. With the rise and fall of the carriage, their knees almost touched each other. Ning Ke moved back and leaned against the cotton cushion by the window. His sore body finally found a support point, and he could not help but let out a comfortable sigh. Looking at the beautiful face of the young girl close at hand, he said, "This is what the world is like. You don't need to be unhappy about those disgusting things." Yesterday, he helped Mo Shanshan make up and tied her waterfall-like black hair at the back. When she woke up this morning, Mo Shanshan still maintained this hairstyle. He did not know whether she did not care about it, or she thought Ning Ke's craftsmanship was really good. So when she habitually combed the hair in front of her forehead, her slender fingers missed. She very seriously asked, "Joy and hate are all emotions. How can you suppress them?" Ning Ke leaned against the window, and his eyes were slightly squinted by the dazzling morning sunshine from the corner of the curtain. After a moment of silence, he said, "I don't mean to suppress this kind of emotion, but to not be affected by this kind of emotion. Being angry is to punish yourself with other people's mistakes. It is not worthwhile." Mo Shanshan slowly frowned and persistently asked, "But being angry is being angry." Looking at her eyebrows, Ning Ke suddenly had an impulse to touch them with his fingers. He withdrew his hands into his sleeves and said, "Since you are angry, of course you should vent your anger as soon as possible. So I support you to go to the palace. But have you thought clearly, once you meet the cavalrymen of Divine Hall or those nobles in the palace, what should you do?" Mo Shanshan shook her head expressionlessly. She just intuitively thought that she should go to the palace to find the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and those people on the meadow, and seek justice for the dead Yen Kingdom's soldiers and soldiers. Ning Ke seemed to have guessed what she was thinking. He looked at her and said seriously, "There is no such thing as justice. Even if you are powerful enough, you may not be able to get it back. So venting your anger has nothing to do with justice, but fairness. King Yen, Man Yu. If others hit us, we will hit them. If others curse us, we will hit them. If others want to kill us, we will kill them first. Mo Shanshan opened her eyes and looked at him. It seemed that she did not expect that many things from his mouth would become so simple and presumptuous. She slightly frowned and asked, "You Tangs, do you all see things like this?" "Almost." Ning Kei said with a smile, "We have been receiving this kind of education since we were born." Mo Shanshan reached out to lift the curtain of the window beside her. She looked at the desolate scenery of the wilderness gradually retreating, looked at the few lonely birds in the distant sky, and thought of the people in the horse carriage on the meadow yesterday. After a moment of silence, she said, "What if I can't kill those people when I arrive at the palace?" Naturally, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the nobles they protected could not be killed easily, even if she was the well-known calligraphy addict. Ning Kei looked at her confused expression and vaguely guessed that those people on the meadow might be of extremely high status. Who were those people on the meadow yesterday? Mo Shanshan turned her head and looked at him. She softly said, "The students of the Revelation Institute and the monks of the White Tower Temple. If you want to ask the person in the horse carriage, she is the princess of the Yueluan Kingdom and also the favorite of the Revelation Institute." Ning Kei's frown gradually relaxed. The change in his expression did not mean that he was relaxed. Instead, it showed that he was a little surprised. He said, "The flower addict Lu Chenjia? What is the legendary wonderful person doing in the wilderness?" Mo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly smiled. Her originally stiff expression suddenly became lively because of this rare smile. Especially the undisciplined and cold gaze in her eyes, it actually became a bit cuter in an instant. "You don't know that Mo Shanshan is the calligraphy addict, but you know the name of the flower addict." Ning Kei smiled. He thought that if it was the flower addict, it would be wishful thinking for them to go to the palace to seek justice. After his smile gradually faded, he looked at Mo Shanshan and said, "You can't kill people, but you want to vent your anger. Perhaps I can give you some ideas. What does the flower addict Lu Chenjia like or value the most?" "She is called the flower addict. Her favorite and most cherished thing is naturally flowers." Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Kei's face as if she was looking at an idiot. She said, "Other than that, everyone knows that she is crazy about Prince Long Qing. In fact, she is a very virtuous person." Ning Kei thought for a moment and said, "Venting anger is nothing more than bullying people. If you want to go to the palace to vent your anger, then you can directly start with flowers and virtuousness." Then, he began to seriously plan for Mo Shanshan. Once they met Lu Chenjia in the palace, what kind of method should be used to appease the anger of the disciples of Black Ink Garden and how to avoid causing too much of a commotion. Mo Shanshan's brows furrowed slightly as she listened to these seemingly childish yet sinister ideas when she thought about it carefully. She looked at Ning Kei's smiling face under the morning light. She looked at his fresh little dimples and suddenly felt that his smile was so hateful and so cute at the same time. Bullying people was Ning Kei's favorite thing to do. Bullying the strong as the weak was something he loved more than making love. He thought to himself that he had already bullied Prince Long Qing once in advance. He did not know what the flower addict would think of him if she knew. Just as he was thinking excitedly, he suddenly realized that Mo Shanshan was looking at him attentively from the corner of his eyes. Only then did he realize that he had gotten carried away and could not help but smile awkwardly. Ning Kei asked, "Are you very familiar with the flower addict?" At this time, Mo Shanshan was grinding ink and laying paper. In order to keep a distance from Ning Kei, she leaned as far as possible towards the window. She answered, "She once went to Mogan Mountain a few years ago. I spent dozens of days with her." Ning Kei leaned against the carriage and looked up at the plain decorations in the carriage. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "What kind of person is the flower addict? Is she very beautiful? Is she really as crazy about flowers as the rumors say?" Mo Shanshan's right hand holding the pen slightly paused. She turned back to look at him and said, "Are you very interested in her?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "I'm really curious about what Prince Long Qing's fiancé looks like. Because I've always been curious. Is there any woman in this world who doesn't feel inferior when facing Prince Long Qing's perfect face?" Mo Shanshan gently put the pen on the shelf and turned around with her hand on the ground. She slightly tilted her head to look at him and asked, "Have you seen Prince Long Qing?" "Even if I haven't seen him, I've heard of him. Everyone knows that His Highness is the most beautiful man in the world." After saying this, Ning Ke found that the young talisman master was still staring at him. He knew that she did not believe this statement, so he had to raise his hands in surrender and said with a smile, "Well, I admit that I have seen him." Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly. No one knew what she was thinking about. Her eyes, which were as calm as the autumn lake, suddenly became bright for a moment. Her lips slightly moved as if she wanted to ask something, but in the end, she did not ask. She seemed to be a little flustered. Perhaps to cover up the previous moment of panic, she slightly bowed her head and slightly blinked her eyelashes. She sat down again with her hands on her knees and said another thing, "You once analyzed that the target of those horse gangs should be me instead of the provisions. But in fact, their target should be you." She raised her head and looked at Ning Ke, as if she was looking at the scenery of the wilderness outside the window behind Ning Quebec. She seriously said, "I clearly saw the scene behind the wall of fire. They came prepared and just wanted to kill you." Ning Ke did not ask the question that he did not ask. He knew that she had long suspected his identity, but she did not ask directly, which made him feel a little grateful. But at this time, he was still hesitating when to tell the girls of the Great River Kingdom about his true identity and did not know how to answer. Speaking of the fire wall in the battle yesterday, he remembered the horrible hole that the half-divine talisman hit on the wall of fire. He said, "At that time, I thought that was the last sky-burning fire talisman you could display. After that, your psyche power was exhausted and you could not even display the simplest talisman Taoism. I did not expect that you still had such a trick." Mo Shanshan suddenly leaned forward and very seriously bowed to him. She softly said, "Senior brother, I have to thank you for teaching me how to fight the day before yesterday." "Shanshan thanks you here." Ning Ke was startled. He remembered that he had severely reprimanded her a few days ago, saying that she was soft-hearted and that she did not know how to fight at all and did not know to save the most powerful power for the most critical moment. At that time, he did not completely guess her identity. At this time, thinking that he was actually teaching the calligraphy addict how to fight, he could not help but feel a little emotional. "In any case, we could survive because of your half-divine talisman." At that time, he was in a critical situation and did not have a clear feeling about the earth-shattering divine talisman. But after thinking about it carefully last night, he increasingly felt that the girl talisman master opposite him was amazing. It was not a big deal to challenge someone in the 5 states of cultivation. As Chen Pippi said, with his cultivation aptitude, even if he entered the knowing destiny state, he would be the weakest one in the history. If there was no other means, any powerhouse in the see-through state could try to challenge or even kill him. But states were states. Mo Shanshan was obviously still in the see-through state, but she could display the infinitive talisman that only divine talisman masters could display. This fact deeply shocked and puzzled a Ning Quebec master Yen Sei concluded that he was a rare genius in talisman Taoism in the world. However, looking at the girl in white who was quietly sitting on her knees in front of him and her beautiful face which was neither angry nor happy, Ning Ke rarely had a lack of confidence. "Master, did you choose me because you already knew that the most talented successor of talisman Taoism in the world was taken away by the master of calligrapher? But in this way, I feel very embarrassed." Of course, Mo Shanshan could not guess Ning Ke's psychological activities at this time, and she did not know that he was silently criticizing a respected divine talisman master and feeling sorry for himself. She put her hands together and bowed, asking seriously, "Senior brother Zhong." Ning Ke woke up and corrected her seriously, "I said, you can call me 13. Mo Shanshan was stunned and felt that this title was a little awkward. After hesitating for a moment, she said bitterly, 13. Senior brother, I want to ask you something. Seeing her serious and solemn, Ning Ke did not know what she wanted to say. He calmed himself down and saluted back, saying, please go ahead. Mo Shanshan said, I have been cultivating talisman Taoism with my master since I was a child. I have been in contact with books and talismans for more than 10 years. I want to ask you to teach me how to fight with me and how to win. Looking at her serious expression, Ning Ke knew that yesterday's battle must have impacted this young talisman master's view of the world. She had been famous for a long time, so she made this request. In terms of cultivation state, he knew that he was mediocre. Compared with his senior brothers and sisters in the back mountain, Prince Long Qing and the young talisman master opposite him, he was not worth mentioning at all. But when it came to fighting, he had been struggling between life and death since he was a child, dancing on the edge of the blade. His whole life was continuous fighting, so he was extremely confident. Fighting is a very simple thing. It is how to make the opponent lose the ability to hurt you under the premise of protecting yourself. So we must first know what kind of strength we have and what kind of strength the enemy has. Ning Ke pointed at the carriage roof above their heads and said, we must first know how high the roof is from the floor to the roof, and then know how high we are. Only then can we know whether we will hit our head when we stand up. Of course, we may break the roof of the carriage, but I think not many people are willing to use their head to measure the hardness of the roof. It was a very simple language and a very shallow metaphor, but it could be described more clearly than the preparation work before a fight. When Mo Shanshan was thinking, her eyes became more unfocused and indifferent, and no one knew where she was looking. She murmured softly, how to judge that the opponent has lost the ability to hurt himself? Ning Ke liked to answer this seemingly stupid but actually very important question. He leaned against the cotton cushion beside the window, raised his hand in the air and answered, breaking the arms or legs is the most common way to seriously injure someone. But if you need to make sure that the opponent has lost all the fighting power, remember one sentence, only the dead are safe. Hearing this, Mo Shanshan looked a little confused, as if she didn't understand why Ning Ke always put death at the forefront when it came to fighting. She had been taught by Mr. Mo Chi since she was a child that the fight between cultivators didn't necessarily have to be about life and death. Ning Ke looked at her expression and realized that this calligraphy addict was really a pure white lotus flower born in the ink lake. Before coming to the wilderness, she didn't know the sufferings of the world at all. He couldn't help saying earnestly, if you cultivate in the ink lake, of course you don't need to think about these problems. Just like me, if I hide in the academy to study, I only need to play chess, forge iron, and listen to music every day. I don't know how happy my life would be. But the world outside the small building is full of wind, frost, snow, and rain. Since you have stepped into it, you have to understand how dangerous it is. Mo Shanshan heard his sincere words and nodded to show that she was enlightened. At the same time, she looked at him gratefully. Unfortunately, her eyes were still so unfocused that Ning Ke couldn't feel her gratitude clearly. 13th brother, if the opponent's strength and state are far beyond yours, how can you defeat him? Hill Master, 13th brother, you can call me by my name. If the ordinary people in the world know this, they will inevitably think that I am too disrespectful. Then please call me younger sister Shanshan. Younger sister Shanshan, the question you asked just now is basically unsolvable. If anyone can answer this question perfectly, then he will be the most powerful person in the world, because he has ways to defeat those who are more powerful than him. Mo Shanshan frowned slightly. After a long time of silence, she asked seriously, Senior brother, are you being sarcastic? Ning Ke looked at her blankly. From the side of the blue lake, he found a fact that made him feel a little uncomfortable. Finally, there was someone in the world who could defeat him countless times. Younger sister, you can think of it as sarcasm. But please don't think too much about it. The sarcasm in my speech is often to deepen the impression of the listener, because this matter is very important. Mo Shanshan nodded and continued to ask, then how can we defeat enemies who are far more powerful than us? Ning Ke answered seriously, when facing enemies who are far more powerful than us, I insist that we only have one choice. Mo Shanshan raised her small face slightly and asked with expectation, what choice? Ning Ke said, escape. Don't be speechless. Escape is also a kind of battle. When facing opponents who are far more powerful than us, even if you want to escape, you may not succeed. If you want, I can start teaching you from the beginning of escape. Senior brother, it is indeed a very good character to think about failure before talking about victory. But I still want to learn how to win first. Mo Shanshan sat on a small table by the window, holding an ink brush in her hand, ready to take notes carefully. Ning Ke looked at this scene and could not help but feel a little proud. He could not help but think of last spring, when he was on the horse carriage returning from the wilderness. He used to take down every word of old Master Liu with an ink brush on a piece of paper just like her. He felt a lot of complicated emotions, and after calming down a little, he said seriously, you are right. Among the younger generation in the world, there are not many people who can surpass you in cultivation state. I believe that in most cases, the opponents you face, like the horse gang yesterday, are far weaker than you. He said seriously, when facing an opponent who is weaker than you can't have sympathy, can't have arrogance, and can't see the opponent as a weak person. Instead, you have to treat the opponent as the most powerful enemy. But you must remember that you can't look down on the opponent in terms of fighting spirit, and you should have a choice in tactics. When facing a strong opponent who is weak, it is like a fierce tiger pouncing on a rabbit. A fierce tiger's full strength does not really transfer all its strength to its palms, and then kill the weak rabbit. Instead, it focuses on the mind, and does not give the weak rabbit any chance to escape. Pouncing on the rabbit and killing it avoids the tiredness of chasing, entanglement, and can save energy. If the tiger appears, even hundreds of rabbits will not dare to move. Mo Shanshan remembered these words, raised her head, looked at him, and asked, what if two tigers meet? Ning Ke said, pretend to be injured and beg for mercy, saying that I have silently loved you for 10,000 years, and do everything possible to weaken your opponent's will, like beating his mother, killing his family, and slapping his son, and do everything possible to provoke him and make him lose his mind. If you wear shoes, go to the thorny land. If you wear thick clothes, choose the bitter cold land, and do everything possible to create a suitable fighting background for you. If the opponent is strong, you will fight with the tip of your claws, and cut his skin to make him bleed. If the opponent's claws are strong, you will wait quietly, and let him injure you slightly. Then you will find an opportunity to enter a desperate situation, and do everything possible to hide your weakness and take the lead. Mo Shanshan listened to him talking about all kinds of situations, and her eyes became more and more unfocused. She subconsciously muttered to herself, it sounds very troublesome. Where can I find so many ways? If all the methods don't work, then you only need to remember the last one. Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, when two tigers meet, the brave one wins. Mo Shanshan opened her eyes and looked at him seriously. After a long time of silence, she completely understood the meaning of these words, and said softly with emotion, Senior brother, you really know a lot of things. Ning Ke always felt that her focused eyes seemed to be focused on something else. Hearing this praise, he could not help but feel a little strange, and said, Younger sister, you have countless admirers in the world, and I can't stand being praised by you so often. Mo Shanshan frowned and asked confusedly, Senior brother, why do you know so many things? Ning Ke adjusted his sitting posture and said with a smile, the master of the academy once taught us that true knowledge comes from practice. Younger sister, if you had been fighting since you were a child like me, then you would naturally know so many things. Mo Shanshan's expression became more and more dull. Senior brother, you have fought so many battles. Were you very naughty when you were a child? Ning Ke's body was slightly stiff, and he felt that it was really hard to talk to this white lotus of black ink garden. Mo Shanshan asked, Senior brother? Ning Ke waved his hand tiredly and said, Younger sister, I also have a question to ask you. Mo Shanshan asked, what is it? Ning Ke looked at her eyes and asked, why do you never look me in the eye? Mo Shanshan looked at him and asked confusedly, when did I? Ning Ke felt that she was looking at the wilderness outside the window, and sighed, anytime and anywhere, such as now. Mo Shanshan suddenly thought of something, and her expression became slightly stiff. After a moment of silence, she explained softly, I have loved calligraphy since childhood, and I have copied too many calligraphy sections, so my eyes are not very good. Ning Ke slightly opened his mouth, and did not know what to say. Only then did he know that the world-famous calligraphy addict turned out to be short-sighted, and from her eyes, could it be that there was some astigmatism? I gradually found that I have always had the complex of being at the bottom of a dry well, but my mind has never been clearer in this book, and my plan will not be disturbed by many things. It is said that the story and characters written by the writer will sometimes become more powerful than the writer, but it will not happen at night, because I clearly know where the powerful thing is. I love it. There is still one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 225. Ning Ke and the disciples of Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom had been familiar with each other since they helped each other by the Blue Waste Sea and hunted together in the wilderness. After fighting side by side in the meadow, they were even more intimate. In the following days, Ning Ke stayed in the horse carriage to heal his wounds. At the same time, he reformed the Talisman Master's worldview, outlook on life, and outlook on fighting again. He seldom got off the horse carriage and even ate and took a break in the carriage. In the eyes of the disciples of Black Ink Garden, they inevitably felt a little strange. They were very clear that the Hill Master's temperament seemed to be indifferent, but in fact, she was mild and gentle. But she had never been so close to a young man. Zhuo Zhihua also felt it was very inappropriate. But thinking that Ning Ke was seriously injured, she felt embarrassed to let him get off the horse carriage. In fact, Ning Ke's injury recovered very quickly. He no longer coughed blood on the second night. His sense of perception, which had been severely shaken, also gradually subsided. The occasional dizziness did not appear again. Zhuo Zhihua and other disciples of Black Ink Garden were not very clear about his physical condition. But Mo Shanshan saw the whole process of his recovery and inevitably felt a little puzzled. That night when Ning Ke drew his bow and killed several horse gang members, Mo Shanshan felt the fluctuation of psyche power. At that time, she guessed that Ning Ke should be a cultivator. She was not so surprised about this. The academy, which was a wonderful place, chose students to go to the wilderness alone to perform tasks, so the students were naturally extraordinary. But the horse gang leader was a psyche master who had entered the upper state of see-through. If she had not understood the half-divine talisman in Mogan Mountain in spring, she could not have hurt him. Such a powerful psyche master attacked Ning Ke with all her strength. According to common sense, even if Ning Ke could survive, his sense of perception would be seriously damaged and it was very likely that he would become an idiot. How could he talk with confidence and fluency like now? Was Ning Ke's psyche power stronger than hers? The calligraphy addict was not good at talking with people, especially unwilling to pry into other people's privacy. So she had many doubts about Ning Ke, but she did not ask any questions. She just sat quietly by the window and used graceful small regular script to remember Ning Ke's instructions. Then she carefully chose what she could learn and tried to understand it. Ning Ke couldn't help praising her calligraphy, because Mo Shanshan's calligraphy was indeed excellent. The brush strokes were round but not coquettish, soft but firm, and the strokes were faintly discernible and clear. The thickness was appropriate and fresh. At this moment, he finally understood why the female disciples of Black Ink Garden laughed so happily when he praised that the female talisman master's calligraphy obsession was similar to his own style in the camp a few days ago. The calligraphy addict was obsessed with books. The books here were the books of the world, not the books of reading and writing thousands of books. In the eyes of the disciples of Black Ink Garden, it was really ridiculous for an ordinary person to say that the calligraphy addict in the world was similar to his own style. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden rode on horses and took a turn at a certain ice jam. From the northeast to the northwest, they went straight to the palace. Along the way, they saw few people, mostly cold-tolerant Kashmir sheep and wasteland. The road was still difficult to travel. The carriage kept undulating and shaking. Ning Kei looked at her still wrist hanging the brush by the window, and the handwriting on the paper was not messy at all. He could not help but sigh with emotion. His reputation as a talisman Taoism genius was not so real in front of this girl. Would even his reputation as a calligraphy master be taken away? He placed the cotton pad behind the carriage and lay down comfortably. His face was very close to Mo Shanshan's white dress. He casually pulled out a piece of paper from the stack on the small table. When his eyes fell on it, he couldn't help but be slightly startled. There were some familiar words written on the paper. Young Master Sang, I'm drunk today, so I won't. When he saw the young talisman master writing quietly by the window, Ning Kei thought of third sister by the east window of the old library. He began to miss the academy in the south of Chang and city, the days in the back mountain and those lovely fellow disciples. At this time, he suddenly saw his chicken soup calligraphy in the wilderness thousands of miles away. He began to miss the alley in the eastern city of Chang and the days in the old brush pen shop and the dark and thin guy. Mo Shanshan noticed his strange expression. She turned her body with her hands on the ground and found that he was looking at the chicken soup calligraphy she bought with a lot of money. She could not help asking, 13th brother, do you also know calligraphy? It must be said that the calligraphy addict was not good at communicating with people. If it was someone else who asked, they would probably say, senior brother, do you also like calligraphy? But she was direct and did not think about the listener's feelings at all. Ning Kei had long been used to her talking about things like second brother's ancient crown from time to time. He did not care about it at all. He shrugged and answered, a little. Mo Shanshan once asked him if he also knew talisman Taoism. At that time, his answer was a little. Now that they talked about calligraphy, his answer was still a little. In front of others, he might have the confidence to say that he was a genius in talisman Taoism and a calligraphy master. But in front of the calligraphy addict, he felt that it was better to keep a low profile to avoid losing face. Mo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly asked, what do you think of this calligraphy? She looked very focused and seemed to pay attention to Ning Kei's answer. Ning Kei did not expect that she would ask for his opinion. He said in surprise, you mean the chicken soup calligraphy? Mo Shanshan looked at him and said seriously, senior brother is a student of the Chang and Academy. Of course, you have heard of the chicken soup calligraphy. I heard that this calligraphy is a masterpiece of the Academy, so I want to hear your opinion. There was a common saying that it was always difficult to know oneself. But it was also difficult to comment on oneself, especially in the case that the listener did not know, if you still wanted to praise yourself. Ning Kei hid his true identity from the disciples of Black Ink Garden. Although he did not have any malice, they were so close now. Once he was exposed, it would inevitably be a little embarrassing. Therefore, he had to continue to hide it until there was no suitable opportunity. At this time, facing such a situation, it was even more embarrassing. Moreover, he did not know what the young talisman master thought of the chicken soup calligraphy and him who wrote it. If she liked to appreciate it, it would be fine. But if she hated his calligraphy, wouldn't it be very troublesome? This possibility was not small. Although there was a saying that there was no first place in literature, in fact, people like Mo Shanshan, who was good at calligraphy, would always be somewhat disapproving of other calligraphers according to the conflicts that had occurred in the gatherings of poets and calligraphers in Chang'an. Scholars despise each other, so is it not between calligraphers? The tip of the brush of this calligraphy is exposed but not restrained. The form is scattered and the spirit is dead without a bone. It seems to be innovative, but in fact, it is just some chicken tricks. It is evil and lacks the style of righteousness and elegance. It is not worth mentioning. He did not hesitate to belittle the chicken soup calligraphy. His expression was calm, and he hid all the embarrassment and bitterness in his body. He did not dare to show any of it. This might be the so-called price. Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly, as if trying to discern whether he was speaking the truth or just casually belittling her. After a long time, she asked seriously again, "Then what does senior brother think of the blooming flower calligraphy?" Ning Ke looked at her and said with slight surprise, "Younger sister, you have even read the flower blooms calligraphy?" Mo Shanshan shook her head and said, "I have collected some copies of the calligrapher of the academy. But the flower blooms calligraphy is hidden in the deep palace. Even the copies are also collected by the mansions of the princes and dukes in Chang'an. Therefore, I have only heard of its name but not seen it." Ning Ke felt slightly relaxed and replied with a smile, "I have not seen it either, so I can't comment." Mo Shanshan slightly lowered her eyes and fell on the rubbing of the chicken soup calligraphy in his hand. No one knew what she was thinking. She only sighed softly and turned to continue writing her hairpin-style small regular script. In the battle under the meadow that day, she saw the scene on the other side of the wall of fire, but did not see the fleeting fireball in front of the horse gang leader's face. If she knew that Ning Ke beside her was also a person of talisman Taoism, perhaps she would think differently and behave differently at this time. Deep in the wilderness, from the northeast to the northwest, they could see the faint shadow of the mountain in the distance after a short time. Min Mountain was the most magnificent and longest mountain range in the world. It extended from the depths of the wilderness to the south of the Hebei County of the Tang Empire, near Chang'an City. No one knew how many kilometers it stretched, as if it was a sword left by Haotian in the north of the world. In the middle of the wilderness, there was a break in the Min Mountain, which formed a natural canyon. To the west of the canyon, there was a city guarded by the elites of the Tang Empire's North Road Army. It was heavily guarded, and Min Mountain was also divided into two footholds, north and south. The vast Min Mountain where Ning Ke used to live was the southern foothold. The northern foothold of Min Mountain was deep in the wilderness and was called Zashi Mountain by the barbarians, which meant Tianqi Mountain. It meant that if you walked out of this mountain range, you would be abandoned by Haotian. There was a fertile grassland in the east of Tianqi Mountain. The tribe of Chanyu of the left tent had lived on this grassland for generations, and the palace was there. Looking at the shadow of the mountain in the distant sky through the window, Ning Ke naturally thought of Min Mountain in the south, the North Road Army fort on the other side of the mountain, and his old buddies in the city of Wei. He had left the Blue Water Battalion and joined the grain team. He had been walking in the wilderness for many days, but the mountain range was still there, as if it had never changed. Even a horse would die from looking at a mountain, not to mention such a majestic and precipitous continuous mountain range. The palace was close, but it still needed some time to arrive. As the distance was shortened, Ning Ke became more and more silent. He spent more time hiding in the horse carriage and refused to get out. Even when Cat Girl called him to see the white cranes in the wetland, he did not move. Because he needed time to think about two very important issues. The horse gang who attacked them in the meadow had followed them for many days. Later, they had confirmed that the target of the horse gang was him. That meant that the power behind the horse gang had already known that he had left the Blue Water Battalion and joined the grain team. Who were the minions of the horse gang or those groups of horse gang? Who wanted to kill him? Who was the leader of the horse gang? A psyche master in the see-through state could not be a simple leader of the horse gang. Ning Ke felt the aura of a soldier in the battle, which made his heart heavier. The right arm of the leader of the horse gang was cut off by him. If he did not die in the wilderness after being rescued by his subordinates, he must need a place to be treated. Such a serious injury could not be healed by the common horse gang's nest. The man needed doctors and medicine. He had to hurry. And the place closest to the meadow where the broken arm could be healed happened to be the Left Tent Palace. Mo Shanshan insisted on bringing the disciples of the Black Ink Garden to the palace after the provisions were destroyed. Ning Ke did not object. Besides the friendship made in the battle, there was another reason. No matter the person behind the horse gang was the Chanyu of the palace or someone else, he firmly believed that as long as the leader of the horse gang was still alive, there was at least a 90% chance that he was hiding in the palace. He wanted to find him, ask him some questions, and then kill him. In addition, he was also reflecting on what he had done after leaving the academy and coming to the wilderness. Since he was very young, after every difficult battle of life and death, he would analyze and summarize afterwards. That was why he survived with Sang Sang. Reflection had become a kind of instinct for him. However, this reflection in the horse carriage was deeper than all the reflections in the past years. He even traced back to all the actions he had done after leaving the city of Wei and entering Chang'an. After thinking silently for a long time, he confirmed that after leaving the city of Wei, especially after entering the academy, many of his actions or choices were not the most appropriate one, because he had fallen into some kind of misunderstanding. When he was in the city of Wei, he was used to riding alone into the wilderness to spy on the enemy for the general and chase the horse gang with his fellows. So this time, when he brought the students of the academy to the wilderness to practice, he was still used to doing things like this with the two important tasks given by His Majesty and the nation master. He disguised himself and mixed into the grain team, thinking only to act secretly. However, he forgot that he was no longer a small soldier in the city of Wei, not a scout, not a woodcutter in Shubi Lake, but a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, a student of the back mountain of the academy, a golden secret agent of His Majesty, and a visiting professor of the South School of Haotian Taoism and the Imperial Center Administration. Doing things secretly meant that his background, which was admired and respected by countless people, was all meaningless. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall knew that Mo Shanshan was the calligraphy addict, so he did not dare to talk nonsense. If he showed his identity as a disciple of the back mountain of the academy, how would the horse gang dare to attack him? There was also a very important point. Before leaving the academy, second brother specially reminded him in the back mountain that people from the academy could only bully others and not be bullied. How arrogant he was. But now he did not have the identity of a disciple of the back mountain of the academy. Even if he was arrogant, who would know that he was from the academy? Ning Ke supported his chin with his hand and leaned against the window of the carriage. He looked at the mountains and the faintly visible tents in the distance and sighed helplessly. A poor boy from the countryside who made a lot of money in the city would only secretly buy some houses and eat a few bowls of hot and sour noodle slice soup. It would take some time for him to get used to bullying others after all. It was the middle of winter, and the weather was freezing. The grassland at the foot of Tianqi Mountain was covered with green grass in the east and west, maybe because of the geothermal heat in the mountain. The tents were in full bloom in the grassland like white clouds. 2 carriages and a few tired horses carried the disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom to the grassland. There was no grain team behind them, nor any cavalry guards. It looked a little sad. The peace talks between the Lieutenant Palace of the Grassland Barbarians and the coalition forces of the Central Plains had officially begun. All forces gathered here with their cavalries. Noisy and lively sounds could be heard from afar. No one knew how many people were drinking and talking. A cavalry of the palace welcomed the disciples of the Black Ink Garden into the camp. Obviously, the news of the attack on the meadow and the half-divine talisman had spread. Some people knew that the calligraphy addict was in the carriage, so the cavalry behaved respectfully. On the contrary, the messengers and guards from the Central Plains in the camp looked at the disciples of the Black Ink Garden coldly. They did not understand why these people did not return to the north of Yan Kingdom when the provisions were destroyed. Did these disciples of the Black Ink Garden not know that some bigwigs in the Divine Hall and the coalition forces were extremely dissatisfied with their performance? 2 more days, and I'm already dying. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 226. A dozen tired horses and dusty carriages could not affect the situation in the wilderness, and the negotiation between the barbarian royal court and the Central Plains coalition army had nothing to do with them. They had been robbed by the horse gang, but they still insisted on coming here. The Black Ink Garden disciples themselves knew that they wanted to seek justice, but in others' eyes, they were forced to come here to wait for the Divine Hall's decision. The future was bleak, so no one would be willing to come here, even if it was said that the calligraphy addict was in that carriage. The grassland by the mountain was boundless. Although tens of thousands of people gathered here in the middle of winter and tents were in full bloom, there was still enough space to accommodate people. To show their sincerity, the royal court agreed to let the Central Plains Coalition Army choose a place to camp and deploy people. The person in charge of this matter was a manager of the West Hill Divine Palace. After he indifferently greeted Zhuozhihua, he directly led the Black Ink Garden disciples to a place. The two tents were not far from the Coalition Army's central tent, just behind it. However, it seemed a little remote and the terrain was slightly higher. The Black Ink Garden disciples walked into the tents and looked at the pre-prepared equipment. They found that it was not bad, and they knew that the coalition army gave them some face because of the Hill Master. However, from the time they were picked up by the royal court's cavalry to this moment, except for the manager of the Divine Hall, no one from the top of the coalition army or the bigwigs of the Divine Hall showed up. In addition, they saw the indifferent eyes of the people from the Central Plains countries along the way. The Black Ink Garden disciples knew that they were deliberately excluded and forgotten, so they inevitably felt a little depressed. Cat Girl was too young, so naturally, she didn't think too much. She looked at the thick woolen mattress inside the tent and thought that she could finally have a good sleep tonight. She didn't have to squeeze with the mountain master in the narrow carriage, so she seemed a little happy. Ning Ke had experienced being excluded and deliberately forgotten in the academy last year, so he was very used to it and did not care much. He just felt that the location of the camp seemed a little inappropriate. He walked out of the tent and looked into the distance. The big black horse, carrying a heavy luggage, walked to him and gently nudged him with its head. It made an unpleasant sound like bellows, and seemed to be extremely tired. Ning Ke stroked the mane on its neck and scolded it with a smile, "Don't always complain in front of me. It's just a small thing. You don't have to work so hard. We're leaving soon, so don't be in a hurry to unload your luggage. If you're hungry, you can find some grass to eat." The big black horse opened its eyes wide and looked at the faintly discernible grass in the winter wind. It thought painfully that the grass was even less than the hair on the barbarians' heads. How could it be full? The big black horse had a violent temperament, but if it was tamed, it would undoubtedly be a rare steed in the world. If others found out about its real strength, they would definitely treat it like a treasure. No one would treat it like a dog raised casually by their family like Ning Ke, who would kick it out of the house to pick up the leftover bones of their neighbors when there was no food at home. However, it only obeyed Ning Ke's discipline. Seeing that Ning Ke had no intention of asking for hay for it, it dejectedly kicked its hooves and walked out of the camp. It did not know where it could find something to eat. It was still early, but due to the short and bitter winter days in the north, the sun in the sky was faintly approaching dusk. It slowly fell to the ground and the light gradually became dim. A cold wind came from behind the gentle slope. Ning Ke took a cotton scarf out of nowhere and stuffed it into his collar. He said to Zhuozhihua beside him, "It's windy here. It'll be cold at night." Zhuozhihua was the oldest among the disciples of Black Ink Garden. She had a gentle and peaceful temperament. Hearing Ning Ke's reminder, she knew that the previous Divine Hall manager brought them here to camp with such a boring and mean intention. Even she felt a little annoyed, but did not know how to deal with it. Ning Ke pulled a grassland man passing by and said a long sentence with a gentle and sincere expression. Mo Shanshan did not get off the carriage until she heard Ning Ke's difficult words. She lifted the curtain and got off. After the grassland man left, she walked to his side and frowned, saying, "Senior brother, you even know the barbarian language?" Because the Tang Empire was powerful and the divine hall kept preaching, the language of the Central Plains had become extremely popular on the grassland. However, there were still many barbarians who were used to speaking their old language, which was the so-called barbarian language. Ning Ke said, "I speak the Western barbarian language better." Zhuo Zhihua asked, "Senior brother Zhong, what did you say to that man before?" "I asked him if he could set up a tent on the grassland." Ning Ke smiled and continued, "The barbarian said that we are the most distinguished guests of Chanyu. So as long as it is Chanyu's grassland, we can choose any place to live." Hearing this, the disciples of Black Ink Garden outside the tent all understood what he meant. They all laughed and thought that it was not bad to choose another camp. Since the divine hall treated them so well, there was no need to be too close to them. Zhuo Zhihua looked at Ning Ke with a smile and thought that there were no mature men in the same sect. When facing many problems and choices, they indeed lacked courage. Even the Hill Master could not change the situation. Where should we move? Ning Ke looked at the grassland. According to the edict of the Divine Hall, all the countries of the Central Plains had sent people to help Yan Kingdom in the war. At least hundreds of thousands of people were gathered on the two front lines at the frontier fortress of North Yan Kingdom. However, now that they were deep in the wilderness for peace talks, it was impossible for all the countries to bring all of them. But the cavalries guarding the nobles gathered together, at least 1,000 cavalries. On the grassland under the setting sun, the flags were fluttering. There were not many tents on the grassland in the west, but they were arranged in a very orderly manner. The flags fluttering in the cold wind also looked particularly spirited. As for the faintly visible cavalries, they were much more orderly and solemn than the cavalries of the Central Plains Coalition Army here. People usually thought that the most elite cavalries in the world were the papal guardians of the Westhill Divine Palace. However, the number of cavalries of the Divine Hall was too small. According to the scriptures, the number of cavalries was strictly limited to less than 1,000. Therefore, the truly powerful cavalries that dared to conquer the world were the other two. In the wilderness on the other side of Tianqi Mountain, the palace cavalries under the command of Golden Chanyu and the cavalries of the Tang Empire. Ning Ke pointed to the orderly tents on the west side of the grassland and those familiar military flags. He said, "We will camp there." The disciples of Black Ink Garden recognized that it was the camp of the Tang army. They were slightly startled and agreed to his suggestion after a moment. The Great River Kingdom and the Tang Empire had been on good terms for generations. Now they were all here under the edict of the Divine Hall. They believed that no one would say anything mean to them if they set up camp there. Unfortunately, the inexperienced girls of the Great River Kingdom still did not expect that they would abandon the camp designated by the Divine Hall and choose to live next to the Tang camp. This still attracted many people's attention and caused a lot of criticism. Looking at the dozen tired horses and dusty carriages walking towards the Tang camp in the twilight, the swordsmen from the South Jin Kingdom looked indifferent. The monks of the Yueluan Kingdom looked sarcastic. The manager of the Divine Hall said with a gloomy expression, "If you want to ride on the Tang's coattails, then go ahead. I know that there is no rest today, so I have been writing. But as you all know, it is getting slower and slower. I will do my best. Girls, hug me and give me encouragement." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.